The following story occurred in the summer of 2005. I lived in Athens, Georgia, and attended the University of Georgia. At the time, my girlfriend, now wife, lived in Atlanta, which was about a 65-mile drive from my hometown. The highway which takes you to Atlanta from Athens is a 2-lane highway called 316. This is important information for the story. It was a Sunday evening. I had spent the weekend in Atlanta and was now driving back to Athens. In the summer, there are very few cars on the road on Sunday evenings, as many of the students go home for the summer. I was driving a black BMW SUV and was cruising along listening to music. I saw no cars for miles and was approaching a traffic light along 316. The traffic light was red, and I came to a stop alongside an old Mustang. It looked like one of those models from the 1980s, was black in color with a rag top. The windows of the vehicle were tinted. I didn't really give the car a second thought. I just sat there and waited for the light to turn green. When it did, the Mustang suddenly sped off with a squeal of the tires. As if the driver floored it from the idle position, the car sped off far in front of me. I was a bit surprised, but I just thought, another redneck, who cares? The Mustang was soon out of sight and out of mind. I continue driving along, and I'm back in chill mode again, when suddenly, a car with its high beams on appears directly behind me. What the hell? I quickly realized it was the same Mustang from before. They had been waiting alongside the highway for me. I nervously looked down to make sure my phone was still charging, just in case I needed it. It was. The Mustang switches lanes and flies up beside me, keeping pace for a few seconds. The driver then swerves in front of me, then suddenly brakes, bringing the car to a halt. I swerve into the other lane. The Mustang quickly speeds up beside me and starts swerving, trying to knock me off the road. They charge ahead again and try the same braking maneuver once more. At this point, I am freaking out. Now, I'm a 6'3", 220-pound male who works out all the time. I don't easily get scared. But in this situation, size did not matter. I note the license plate on the car and grab my phone. But as I do, the Mustang is suddenly beside me again and begins swerving. I jerk my wheel to the side, and my phone goes flying out of my hands into the passenger side door well. Shit! The Mustang is then behind me, flashing its brights, right on my bumper, speeding up, slowing down, blaring its horn, swerving from side to side. They suddenly take off and are soon out of sight. I take the opportunity to collect myself and drive the remaining 10 minutes to the turnoff road to Athens. I make a quick decision to drive to the police station to file a report. I had the license plate number memorized and had been reciting it over and over again. As I turn off the road to Athens, bright headlights fill my rearview mirror again, and the Mustang is behind me. It speeds past me, turns down another road, and is gone. I arrived at the police station and give them the license plate number. It's a fairly small station, and I think there was only one officer working. He tells me that it's probably somebody mistaking me for somebody else. He runs the plate number and tells me the owner of those tags is deceased. Holy shit. Now I'm really freaked out. I finish filing the report and head home. The story doesn't end there. Later that night, when I was on the phone with my girlfriend, someone outside beats loudly on my garage door several times. Before I could get out to see who it was, I heard a squeal of tires. I never saw a car, but I called the cops immediately, and there has never been any kind of follow-up. I didn't sleep for several nights after that. I'm 21 years old. This happened to me shortly after I turned 18 and graduated high school. My family moved to a new house in Texas. My mother claimed that it was so we could get a fresh start, but I knew the truth. She was ashamed of all the trouble that my sister Jocelyn had gotten into in our hometown. Weeks later, after we settled into the new house, Jocelyn disappeared. My mother received a phone call from my sister's parole officer. Apparently they found her in Atlanta. And to make a long story short, Jocelyn wasn't thrilled about the move, so she ran away to a friend's house. Unfortunately, I couldn't fly back to Georgia with my mom, and I had no choice but to stay in Texas. The next morning after my mom left, I went for a jog around the new neighborhood to familiarize myself. It was when I stopped to catch my breath and change playlists on my phone that I felt a cold feeling creep up my spine. It was the unmistakable sensation that you get when you're being watched. I looked around, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. But I knew that someone was watching me from somewhere close by. I decided to cut my walk short. As soon as I reached my house, I locked the doors and immediately ran upstairs to take a quick shower. While I was washing up, I heard a faint thud from downstairs. I quickly turned off the shower and listened. Another thud followed. I quickly threw on my clothes and ran downstairs to check things out, but there was nothing. The front and patio doors were locked, so I was left feeling a little confused. Trying my best to keep my composure, I was finally able to breathe when my mom called to check up on me. I didn't want my mom to be worried about me. She was already stressing out enough because of the situation with my sister, so I told her that I was fine and that I was going to order takeout and chill for the rest of the day. Later that night, around 10 p.m., I finished up my dinner while binge-watching How to Get Away with Murder on Netflix and eventually fell asleep on the couch. I suddenly woke up a couple of hours later. It was around 1 a.m., and the room was freezing. The thermostat showed 42 degrees. That's when that dreadful feeling came back. I felt like a deer being eyeballed by an apex predator. Danger was close by. My stomach felt like I was doing somersaults. Something was very wrong, and that's when I noticed that my phone was missing. After a brief search on the couch, I couldn't find it. Annoyed, I decided to use a website called Text Now on my laptop. It's a free online service that I sometimes use to track my misplaced phone. Trembling, I typed in my number. Almost immediately, the ringtone abruptly stopped, and that's when I heard heavy breathing coming from the other end. I barely had enough time to respond when I heard a knocking on the glass of the patio doors. I grabbed an unscrewed bedpost from the closet before checking things out. When I looked out through the doors, my heart stopped. Holding my phone was a dark figure in a goat mask. Before I can make out any other details, the masked man slid my patio door open. At the speed of light, I burst through the front doors and headed for my neighbor's house across the street. There, I banged on the door until an older woman came to greet me. She immediately called the police after I explained everything to her. The cops arrived 10 minutes later, and after a thorough search of my house, they found no trace of the intruder. After that ordeal, there was no way I was staying in that house alone, so I asked the officers if I could accompany them to the station, to which they obliged. While I was at the station, one of the officers informed me that they had located my phone outside the house. However, since there were no fingerprints on it, added to the fact that I couldn't give a detailed description of the assailant, it was a dead end. There was one last unpleasant surprise when I unlocked my phone to call my mom. Upon seeing what was in my photo gallery, my blood ran cold. The officer saw that I was uneasy and asked me what was wrong. I handed him the phone. There was about 15 videos of me sleeping on the couch, each nearly 3 minutes long. The masked man that I saw had been inside my house and was watching me while I was sleeping. I felt so violated that I became nauseous and called my mom and told her everything. Hours later, she and my sister came straight from the airport to come get me. We didn't live in that house much longer after that. For the longest time, I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had woken up with that man standing over me. Perhaps I wouldn't be here to tell you this story. It took a while, but I finally came to terms with what happened. But I would be lying if I told you that this experience doesn't haunt me to this day. This story took place during my early childhood, so I'll share events that I can recall. It's mostly bits and pieces. There are some things I can remember in great detail, and some that I can only vaguely recall. So I'll do my best to try to piece things together without getting off track. I have 2 sisters. I'm the middle child. They also remember a good majority of this as well. This happened back in mid-2003. I was 5 years old back then. My 2 sisters were about 4 and 7. So my parents hired a babysitter. Her name was Julie. She had been friends with my mom in high school. She actually lived with us for a while. All I really remember about her was that she was very tall, skinny, and had dark blonde hair that was always tied up. We lived in an apartment complex at the time. It was a place called Oats Creek. So Julie babysat us while my parents worked. She even ended up dating one of my dad's co-workers, which brought a few jokes at my dad's job about him being a pimp. Basically, she became a family friend. Not long after that is when Julie started to change. She started getting very impatient and rude, and even straight up abusive to us, mostly targeting my sisters. My older sister once told me that she thinks that Julie possibly tried to kill her, and in response she grabbed a bottle with green liquid inside of it and tried to force her to drink it. She didn't know what this substance was, and she couldn't get into great detail about the incident itself. I guess her memory isn't as good as mine. Julie would get physically violent with us over the stupidest reasons, such as accidentally knocking something over or spilling a drink. We were just kids. Of course, she only did this when my parents were at work. That was until our family cat attacked her. Julie closed the door with my little sister's hand still in the doorway. It was an accident, or at least I think it was. This, of course, hurt my little sister, who started crying in pain. That's when our cat jumped onto Julie's leg and latched on with her back claws. She was biting and swatting at her, with her tail puffed out, hissing and everything. Basically, she snapped. My parents were a bit surprised, as our cat wouldn't even hurt a fly. It was around this time that they started to suspect that Julie was a bit of a whack job. She still continued to watch after us while my parents worked. This is where my memory gets a little hazy, as if my mind is trying to block something out. There was one occurrence that I still remember to this day, 18 years after the fact. In our room, my older sister had her own twin-sized bed. Me and my little sister shared a bunk bed on the other side of the room, and I slept on the top bunk. Anyway, one night, my little sister woke me up because she couldn't sleep. So she climbed up on the top bunk and we started talking quietly. After a while, she said, "Hey, watch this. I can hang off the edge without falling." However, she slipped and fell to the ground, and I started screaming and crying. That's when Julie storms into the room, yelling and cursing, and spanked my sister with one of my dad's belts. She then picks her up and throws her onto the bottom bunk, and screams for her to go back to sleep, and then storms out, slamming the door behind her. Julie was so enraged that she didn't even see me watching her. I was frozen, completely in shock. I didn't know what to do. I can only remember one time clearly where Julie physically struck me. As I said earlier, she mainly went after my 2 sisters. I can't remember the exact details, and she smacked me across the face. I don't remember why I did it, probably because she was yelling at us about something stupid, which was usual. She told my parents, and then my dad asked her, "Well, what did you do to set him off?" She then got pissy with him and said, "He was just a disrespectful little sh." Eventually, not long after that, Julie went away for good, moved on elsewhere. When she was finally gone, that's when me and my sisters came clean to my parents about everything. Julie struck us several times and yelled at us constantly. My parents can't really remember most of these events, as their memories aren't that great either. But I'm pretty sure they felt absolutely terrible for us, having to go through all this. We never saw or heard from Julie again. I don't know if my parents ever confronted her about anything, but they definitely cut her out of our lives for good. They never contacted the police as there wasn't really any proof of abuse. Everything was all hearsay. Neither of my parents ever caught her actually doing anything. I wish they would have. I'm not sure why my sisters or myself never said anything sooner, like when Julie wasn't around. I'm pretty sure she made threats to us if we did, and perhaps we can't remember. Years later, we found out that Julie had been arrested and served time in jail. Unfortunately, we never found out the exact reason why. Sometimes we all still talk about these events, and I know that I'll remember this for the rest of my life. So yeah, that's my abusive babysitter story. Julie, burn in hell. This happened during my junior year of college. For context, I'm a 22-year-old female. I was driving from my hometown in the Chicago suburbs to the University of Missouri, which is about a 6-hour drive. I made this drive about every 4 to 6 weeks to see my family and my long-distance boyfriend. There were 2 main ways to take to the town that my university was in: stay on the interstate system throughout central Illinois and St. Louis, or branch out on back roads after Springfield, Illinois, until picking the interstate back up about 30 minutes from my college. I usually took the back road simply because it kept me awake with the constant speed limit changes and the occasional towns that I would have to go through. But on this particular time, I took the interstate system all the way there because there was high potential for winter weather. So I was minding my own business, listening to one true crime podcast after another, when about an hour from my exit, traffic came to a standstill. Great, I thought. It was already way beyond dark at this point. It was also a Sunday night, and I just wanted to get home to catch a decent night's sleep before my Monday classes. After a while, emergency vehicles flew past the traffic on the shoulder, indicating that there must be some kind of accident up ahead. After what felt like forever, traffic slowly started crawling again, and eventually picked up pace as soon as we all passed the accident. That's when it started. I will admit that I do like to drive fast on the interstate, especially on this particular drive. What college kid doesn't? I was in the right lane with a decent amount of space between me and the car in front of me, and that's when I noticed someone right on my bumper. Seriously? I muttered out loud. Traffic was no longer super heavy, and the person could easily pass me in the left lane. Suddenly the car began flashing their brights at me and honking. I was extremely confused. I turned off my podcast and kept a close eye in my rearview mirror. The person continued to flash their lights, half blinding me in the darkness, flooring it to the left lane. I maneuvered around a few cars, attempting to get away from whatever issue this person had. Except they followed my every move. Now, being a female in my early 20s, I began to feel sick to my stomach, and I listened to enough true crime and general horror stories to just be the right amount of paranoid. I had read on social media recently about girls from my school encountering sex traffickers in my town and along the interstate that runs through it. One of the town's papers had even ran a series of stories regarding multiple sex and human trafficking rings used around this interstate for capturing victims, because it basically runs the length of the entire country. I shook the disturbing thought out of my head and continued doing about 85 miles per hour in the right lane, unless I had to go around someone. The car continued to follow me, flashing its lights and barely letting themselves ever get more than a few cars behind. I finally took the exit to my university and looked back, and the car was still behind me. It seemed as though that this person was trying to get me to pull over. Is there something wrong with my car that I just can't see? I wondered silently. There was no way in hell I would be pulling over on the side of an interstate in the middle of a dark, rainy night. It's exactly how urban legends or teenage slasher movies start out. At this point, I had no idea what to do. Looking back, I really should have drove straight to the local police station, but I was too flustered and scared to even think straight. I tried to think back on the last hour or so of my drive. Had I cut anyone off? I don't think so. I'm a relatively good driver, and I tend to mind my own business on the road, not engaging in any road rage or anything stupid like that. so I stupidly began driving to my apartment. The car continued to follow, still flashing their lights every so often, but no longer honking. They continued to stay glued to my bumper, and that's when I started to panic. What if they followed me all the way home? What the hell should I do? Call the police and send them on some wild goose chase to look for me in this car while I'm driving around town? As I approached another small exit off of a local highway onto a smaller street that ran past campus and toward my apartment, I had an idea. As I got closer to my exit, I did not get in the far right lane to turn off. At the very last second, I jerked the wheel and careened across the gravel shoulder so close to the grass that I barely missed driving off the road. As I gunned down the exit ramp, I glanced up at the overpass. The car had come to a screeching halt and was honking its horn manically. I broke down in tears for the rest of the way home, calling my boyfriend and explaining what had just happened. I never got a good enough look at the car to get a license plate number, or even really a good description of the vehicle, so I never reported the incident to the police. I have no idea what exactly was happening that night. My best guess is that whoever this person was, they saw me when traffic was stopped on the interstate, waiting for the emergency vehicles to clear the scene. It's very clear from the stickers that I have on my car, one being my university's name, and one that says Dog Mom, that it was likely that I was a college-aged female. All this person had to do was end up next to me to see that I was a female driving alone on the interstate in the middle of the night and have just the wrong intentions. When I was in high school, I lived in a very small town in Texas. It was the kind of place where everyone was either related to each other or hated each other. I had no family there, so yeah. I did have a pretty blonde girlfriend, and was pretty hated for that too. Nothing major, just some petty harassment and occasional fighting. But at the time things had been escalating. So that's why on Valentine's Day, my girlfriend and I decided to skip the school dance and just stay in and watch a movie at her house while her parents went out. It was just better to avoid any kind of trouble. We borrowed her dad's car, a little Honda hatchback, and went into town. We stopped at the video store, and afterwards we went to Dairy Queen and headed back to her house. Now, she lived in the boonies. It was out in the middle of the forest, along a lonely road, with no streetlights. We were chatting and eating our blizzards, when all of a sudden a car comes up behind us. No big deal. It became a big deal when the headlights flooded the interior of our car, and I saw a pair of hands on the back seat, and the top of someone's head peering up from the hatchback. The lights had illuminated somebody hiding in the back of our car. As soon as the lights hit, the head and hands retreated back down. A solid chill ran through the entire length of my body. I slowly reached down and pulled out my pocket knife. It was the only thing I had. My girlfriend saw me and asked what was wrong. I then responded, "Nothing. I just had to stop at my friend's house real quick." She knew that was bullshit. I didn't have any friends. I pulled over at the next house that came up and jumped out of the car, yelling at her to do the same. She jumped out in total confusion. I flipped the driver's seat forward and lunged into the back seat in full maniac mode. The intruder popped up like a jack-in-a-box with empty hands waving. Hey, relax. What are y'all up to tonight?" It was some weird kid from our high school who we had never spoken to before, ever. "What in the holy are you doing in our car? I thought you guys were going to the dance." "I was just hitching a ride." We sat there staring at him with our mouths open, wondering what to do. He tried to act real cool, and obviously we were in the middle of nowhere in some random person's driveway. We ended up driving him to the dance and dropping him off. The whole time he was telling us to come inside with him. Yeah, not happening. We dropped his ass off and sped out of there as fast as we could. When we got back to my girlfriend's house, she began crying and was shaking. She was completely freaked out. I still have no idea what he was planning on doing when the lights caught him crawling out of the hatchback. This happened a very long time ago, and thinking about it now still creeps me out. I lived in Adair County, Kentucky on a horse farm. One summer day about 5 or 6 years ago, my mother, who's the horse enthusiast in our family, found a new horse she wanted to purchase in Lawrenceburg. We'll refer to the seller of this horse as James. Lawrenceburg is one of several places throughout Kentucky where people have claimed to have seen Kentucky's version of Bigfoot, the hillbilly beast, which has been sighted all over the state of Kentucky. My brother and I were suckers for that kind of thing, like most kids are. We decided to tag along with my mother, hoping that we would see it ourselves. When we arrived in town, James's house was located on the outskirts, miles from anywhere. Only a few houses were dotted here and there on the sides of the road, but there was one in particular I will never forget. We were about 5 minutes away from James's house and going slow because we had a trailer hooked to the back of our 4Runner. I was staring out the window, hoping to see the hillbilly beast hiding somewhere in the woods, when I saw a house. This house had well over 20 mannequins throughout their yard, all shapes and sizes. Most were lying down or propped against what looked like a shed, but there were 2 among them that really freaked me out. One was an adult female, tied to a tree right next to the road, so close I could probably touch it if I rolled down the window and stuck my hand out. The second was the size of a baby. It was nailed to a tree only a couple yards away. Both of them looked really old and worn out, molding, rotting, etc. My mom stopped the vehicle, and we were all just sitting there staring at this place. The house was old and run down, but obviously someone still lived there. The shed that was right next to it appeared almost brand new, minus what looked like satanic graffiti written all over it. The 3 of us were totally freaked out. We drove away, heading toward James's house. Once we got there, we asked him about the freaky mannequin place down the road. James claimed that he never saw anything like that. He also said that he was just in town that morning and took that exact road, so it's likely he would have seen it. Once we left with the new horse, we took a different way home, so we didn't have to look at the mannequin house again. Part of me thinks this could have been some freaky prank, but another part of me wonders, what if some of them weren't actually mannequins?
I used to eagerly await Halloween every year when I was growing up. Since I wasn't able to attend Oktoberfest until I was 21, I really didn't have anything else to look forward to. I would trick-or-treat with my sister until she passed, or with friends. Once I went by myself, and I really wish I hadn't. It was 2014. I was bored, so I figured I would buck tradition and go trick-or-treating by myself. I went to a Spirit Halloween store and bought a Link costume, since The Legend of Zelda is one of my favorite video game franchises. I saw a few other people there, and figured they were bored or going to a party. So I paid for my things and left. I decided to leave at 5, and when I walked outside, I saw a few other people starting early. I quickly called a couple of friends. One of them had apparently dressed as Laughing Jack, and the other was Clockwork from Creepypasta Stories. We were talking via FaceTime, and at one point one of my friends asked, "Who did you convince to dress as a demon?" When I asked what he meant, he replied, "Don't play dumb. There's someone standing next to you dressed like a demon." I looked over to my left, but I didn't see anything. I almost looked to my right, but before I turned that way, I felt a chill on the back of my neck. I knew if I turned my head completely, I would see something that I didn't want to see. I decided to just do my trick-or-treating to get my mind off of things. A few people I knew said it was great that I was doing it one last time, but I wasn't able to smile about it, because the whole night I felt a nauseating feeling. and it felt like someone was following me. That same dreadful sensation that if I turned my head, I would see something terrifying followed me. After a couple of hours, I had a giant amount of junk food, so I was ready to go back home. I took a deep breath and turned around. That was a mistake. What I saw wasn't scary at first. It looked like perhaps an 8-year-old kid, and we just stared at each other. He looked at an old house, but I just peeked inside to see if there were any occupants. Then he turned back to me, and he said something with a voice that sounded more animalistic than human.
I never went to your house, so don't go to mine.
I was about to say something. Then the boy blinked, and when I saw his eyes again, they were red. At that very same moment, a scent hit me. It smelled of sulfur. I was so scared I actually froze there on the spot.
Do you want me in your house?
He or it then demanded to know. It must have been loud, because a few kids turned towards me then. They screamed and ran away. I quickly shook my head, and this weird kid growled, then vanished. I probably broke Usain Bolt's record, judging by how fast I ran back home. I jumped inside my house and slammed the door shut. I know it was a demon. And I also knew that after that, I was done trick-or-treating for good. Nowadays, it's only Oktoberfest for me. Halloween has never been the same for me since that fateful night, back in 1983. It's been about 40 years now, but I still get chills when I think back to the last time I ever went trick-or-treating on Halloween night as a kid. I grew up in a suburban neighborhood, right outside of Chicago. It was a pretty typical middle-class area. Rows of brick houses and ranch styles, big trees lining the streets. Other than the occasional storm, things were peaceful and uneventful. But that all changed when I was 14 years old. It was October 31st, and as usual, I was looking forward to trick-or-treating with my friends, Mike and Eddie. We had our costumes all picked out. I was going as Jason from Friday the 13th. Mike was a typical vampire, and Eddie was dressed up like David Bowie. My friends came over around 6, just as it was getting dark. We gathered up our pillowcases and headed out to start making our way through the neighborhood. Things started normally enough. We hit up all the familiar houses, getting the usual candy offerings. Mini Snickers, packets of Smarties, Tootsie Rolls, and whatnot. After about an hour of walking up and down the streets, our bags were getting pretty heavy with candy loot. We were planning to hit a few more houses on our block and then call it a night. We came up on this one old Victorian-style house in the corner that was always decorated really nice for Halloween. It had fake tombstones and cobwebs all over the yard. But when we walked up the path, there were no lights on. No one answered the door, even after repeated rings of the doorbell and knocks. Disappointed, we turned to leave, but that's when Mike stopped us. He said he'd heard at school a rumor about an old man who lived here. Apparently, decades ago, the man's young son had gone missing on Halloween night, never to be seen again. According to legend, the grieving father refused to celebrate the holiday ever again following the disappearance. Now, maybe Mike was just trying to mess with Eddie and me with a creepy story, but there was something so unsettling about that dark, empty house looming over us. I felt compelled to prove him wrong. I figured the old man had probably just stepped out, and we got there too late. Without thinking, I said we should check the backyard real quick. My two friends hesitated, but eventually followed behind as I made my way along the fence toward the back gate. The gate creaked open easily, and we stepped onto the stretch of overgrown grass behind the house. I headed straight for the back door, hoping to see a light on somewhere inside. But the whole house was pitch black. As we stood there on the back step, considering our options, a piercing scream shattered the silence. It was high-pitched and agonizing. We whirled around, trying to locate this sound. For a moment, nothing seemed amiss in the dark backyard, but then I spotted something emerging from a far corner, dragging itself across the ground. It looked like a person crawling on their arms, body arched and writhing unnaturally as it moved towards us. The thing let out another wailing shriek, and I could see the flash of a pale, emaciated face turned our way. The three of us screamed in unison, losing any composure we had left. We turned and ran frantically back through the gate, stumbling over ourselves to get away from that yard. We didn't stop sprinting until we were a block away, breathless and shaking. Once we'd all calmed down a bit, Eddie and Mike seemed convinced that someone was just playing a twisted Halloween prank on us. But I knew deep down that what I saw dragging itself across the grass wasn't a person in makeup or costume. The pale flesh, cries of anguish, it was all too real to be staged. I had no proof of what we witnessed, and my friends quickly normalized it as just a prankster trying to get some scares on Halloween. But I couldn't get the image out of my head. I had no doubt what we'd seen in that backyard was something unnatural, something that didn't belong in this world. We decided to call it a night. Then we headed home with our candy bags in hand. I hardly slept that night, listening intently for any strange sounds outside my window. When I finally did drift off, I had terrible nightmares of emaciated ghosts trying to scratch their way into my bedroom. The next day, I told my parents what I'd seen behind the house the previous night. They wrote it off, assuming Mike and Eddie had planned the whole thing to frighten me. But I could tell by the looks on their faces that they were unnerved, too. We didn't end up putting up any Halloween decorations that year. I've never gone trick-or-treating again after what happened that night. The following Halloween, I decided to stay home and hand out candy to the other neighborhood kids. As I sat watching horror movies in the living room, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was watching our house from outside in the dark. To this day, I avoid being out on Halloween night. Even now in my 50s, I find excuses to be traveling for work or visiting family rather than staying local. Because I know that even 30 years later, the sinister presence I felt crawling towards us in that backyard is still lingering out there somewhere whenever October 31st arrives each year. I won't make the mistake again of venturing out after dark in case I might encounter it. This happened last year on Halloween. I was 18 at the time, and my best friend Andrew was 17. We both thought at the time we were too old for trick-or-treating, and we thought handing out candy was lame. I then came to an idea. There was this old abandoned house that was close to mine. I wanted to go look around inside the house because I thought it would be a good idea for Halloween. Andrew didn't like the idea, but being an idiot, I told him to stop being a baby. We then waited until it was time, then we headed over to the house. We were carrying flashlights with us so we could see. When we got to the abandoned house, I noticed all the kids trick-or-treating and I felt like gagging. Look, somehow, some part of me always hated Halloween, and I never really knew why. I didn't know why, personally. Maybe it was just because I thought Halloween sucked. But at the moment, this abandoned house thing was making me excited. Anyway, when we got there, I smiled and looked up at it. It was very clearly abandoned. It was a huge mess, and a few windows had boards over them. Andrew then mentioned that we should just go home, because he didn't want to spend the night in jail. I told him once again to stop being a baby. Then, without another word, I headed up to the front door. Once I was close enough, I reached for the doorknob. I was half expecting the door to be locked, but the door actually opened up. Andrew and I then looked at each other. I was worried. Andrew told me we couldn't back down now, so he walked on into the house, and I followed behind him. We were then standing in the front hallway. The house had 2 floors. We turned our flashlights on. They were quite bright, and they covered most of the area. Andrew told me he was going to look upstairs, and he told me to stay downstairs. Without another word, he headed up. I sighed deeply before heading off myself. Then I walked into an empty room. All the furniture there was gone. There wasn't anything in the room, and for some reason I was hoping to see something creepy or at least a bug or a bat. Suddenly, I thought I heard a loud noise behind me. I turned around, aiming my flashlight at the noise, but whatever had made the noise was apparently gone. I walked out of the room into the hallway, still wondering what might have made that noise. Maybe I just imagined it. Maybe it was the house settling. I started mumbling about how stupid this was. I decided it was time to go, so I had to find Andrew, then we could leave. I noticed the room in front of me then, and realized it was probably the kitchen, so I decided to go check it out. I headed over, and I poked my head into the room. I moved my flashlight around. I didn't see anything but the normal kitchen stuff. I then walked into it, wondering if there was anything else in there, besides dust and cobwebs. Just then, I stepped on something that almost caused my foot to shoot out from under me. I moved back and looked down using my flashlight. It was a big kitchen knife. I was about to bend down and pick it up to look at it, but something told me I probably shouldn't touch it, so I didn't. I kept wondering why a knife was inside this abandoned house, but I didn't question it. At worst, I figured when they moved out, the previous owners dropped the knife. I headed out of the kitchen and back to the hallway. That was when I heard a loud scream. It was Andrew. I ran upstairs, continuing to hear him yelling about something. He sounded terrified. When I got to where the screaming was, it was a dark, empty bedroom. I used my flashlight, and I soon found Andrew. He was sitting in the back corner of the room. But then I noticed someone else was in the room with us. For one reason or another, the other person did not notice me, or at least they didn't react to me, and I saw Andrew holding his flashlight like a teddy bear. I cleared my throat. Finally, the other person turned around. Whoever this was taller than both me and Andrew. I couldn't tell if it was a male or female, because they had some kind of creepy Halloween mask on, but they didn't seem to be armed. "Leave him alone," I shouted at the person, which was probably a bad idea, because the person laughed, and I could feel anger bubbling up inside of me. I knew that what I was about to do was a stupid idea, but it was the only thing I could think of. I threw my flashlight as hard as I could at this person. It hit them in the face, which made them shout out. This gave Andrew enough time to get away. The two of us ran downstairs, and I could hear the person yelling at us. We didn't look back. We just ran out of the house and down the street before stopping. We were at the sidewalk then, bent over and panting. I groaned under my breath. Andrew pulled out his phone, saying that he was going to call the police about what happened. A moment later, Andrew looked annoyed. He told me the police thought it was a joke, or unimportant, and they hung up on him. I was annoyed because we both knew this wasn't a trick or a prank. We went back to the safety of my house. I wondered then if that person may have been using the old abandoned house as a hideout or their own living space. And if the person was a thief, or worse, like a murderer, perhaps that was their base of operations. After this event, Andrew and I decided we weren't going to do anything crazy for Halloween. We instead helped my parents hand out candy. This happened to me and some friends sometime in high school, back in the early 2000s. There is a cemetery in Denver called Fairmount Cemetery. It was founded in 1890 and is Denver's second oldest operating cemetery after Riverside Cemetery. It was designed by German landscape architect Reinhard Schutz. At 280 acres, the cemetery is patterned after the Mount Auburn Cemetery in Boston. This happened in 2006 or so. It was either Halloween or the Day of the Dead. I can't remember which. And my buddies John and Trevor and I decided it would be fun to go hang out in the cemetery and smoke there. Teenagers, right? So we hopped the fence, and we hadn't even smoked yet, but we were already getting a weird sense, like some sort of presence was out there with us. We began to make our way through the dark and misty tombstones. We were respectful, not stepping on any of the plots, or at least we tried not to anyway. We got down to a hill that was pretty exposed, but it wasn't close to any plots, so we sat down and got ready to fire it up. Just then, we saw what looked to be a series of small blue LED lights. like on a wand or something, like the kind of wands that people use at the airport to direct planes into the terminal. We figured maybe it was a security guard with a weird flashlight or something of the sort. However, it was already trailing out of sight, so we ignored it. We got into position and got all nice and toasty. Suddenly, the night was alive with these orbs of light, bouncing all around us, the most beautiful colors of red and blue and purple and green. They were skipping across the tops of tombstones, twirling and dipping and diving. We were awestruck, and we were all seeing the same things too, so they couldn't have been hallucinations. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, like all the air had been sucked out of the very night itself. And suddenly it got so dark you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. The kind of darkness you can almost feel and touch, heavy, thick, and sticky. Up ahead of us, we saw a light mist forming in the swirling wreaths of black. We couldn't quite make it out at first. Gradually, to our collective horror, we could see what could only be described as a Grim Reaper. Tall and skinny, a skeletal figure, shrouded in shadow, cloaked in that smoky, swirling mist. Its eyes seemed to be lit up from within, a soft red gleam glowing from within its sunken human skull for a face. It wore a black hood, and it had long, slender fingers that wrapped around a massive sickle with a huge blade. We noped the heck out of there, running as fast as we could for the fence. We could hear it chasing after us, and just as we made it to the fence, we turned around to see it flying through the air right at us. We jumped on the fence and hopped over to the other side. When we turned around, that thing flew straight upwards, soaring high into the night, and eventually out of sight. I guess it simply wasn't our time. But I will say this: don't go smoking at night in graveyards, especially during Halloween or the Day of the Dead. Beware if you're in Denver, because the Angel of Death is still out there somewhere. Maybe he's still flying high, waiting for someone to take with him. I live in a modest city in Texas. I was around 17 years old then, so this must have been about 27 years ago. I had decided to go with some girlfriends of mine to a carnival to celebrate Halloween. There's nothing great here in this town, but thankfully we live just 20 miles from Houston. We were hoping to have a good time, as this Halloween landed on a Friday, so we didn't have to worry about school the next day. We soon found the perfect spot. Rides, haunted houses, House of Mirrors, everything else a group of teenage girls could hope for. One of my friends, Donna, spotted this guy who she thought was cute. She brought him to our attention, saying, "Hey, you remember that cute guy I was telling you about?" We all remembered her mentioning something, but she thinks just about every guy around our age was cute. When she pointed this guy out, however, he looked older, old enough that I wasn't comfortable with it. We had baseline rules when we went out. One of them was no guys that were out of high school already. This guy was clearly a break in that rule. He had a full goatee with a white streak down the side of his long ponytail. He didn't look old or feeble, just a well bit older than us, by at least a decade. The creepy thing about him was, as we were looking at him, he smiled and turned a side glance towards us, as if he knew we were looking. This didn't sit well with Tanya, the oldest of us. She was Sheena's older sister that we had to take with us. We didn't have anything against her except she was the voice of reason, and to us at the time that made her a killjoy. But it was a good thing. She was over 18 and had credit cards. She could rent rooms and other accommodations and all that. That night, she rubbed off on us, and she pointed out more than once that this man had been following us. She began to explain, and we all could remember then we had seen him at various locations throughout the night. We even noticed he was outside of the restroom when we came out. Yeah, sticking together was another one of those rules we found necessary. Sheena had an idea about turning the table on him, so to speak. She thought we should give him a taste of his own medicine and follow him everywhere. A way to let him know that we knew what he was doing, to get him to go away. We all agreed it could even be fun, and we could laugh about it later. We started to look at him and follow him. It didn't take long for us to realize that he knew what we were doing. He even at one point got into a line that split into two, so we had to divide up, 2 on one side of him and 2 on the other. After about 15 more minutes of this game, he started walking down a sidewalk, which led around the side of one of the buildings, leading away from the carnival. Yeah, I know, we should have called it quits right then. I felt uneasy, and could tell my friends were as well. But I guess we thought, why not completely chase him off? This would save the next girl that was alone, one that could end up his next creepy target. He turned and looked at us before he walked around the corner. He completely turned around and let us see him. We all stopped completely and stared at him. He just smiled and went around the corner. We made the decision to see what he was up to. We continued around the corner after him. Now here's the strange thing. He was gone. Nowhere in sight. We walked around that corner only a few seconds later, and this guy was completely gone, despite this area being a dead end with no doors. There were no dumpsters or anything, just 3 brick walls close to 20 feet tall. Literally, physically nowhere to go. Needless to say, we were shaken, so we called it a night. That was more than enough for us. If I had to give you advice, even if you're in a group, don't get cute and try to follow a creep. Let them leave if they walk away. As for me, I never want to run into a creep with a ponytail again.
I was a real idiot when I was younger. I got hooked on Oxycontin, got in trouble with the cops, then ended up faced with 2 choices. Either go to jail or take part in a state-mandated rehab program called The Farm. The Farm was, unsurprisingly, a farm, and I'm guessing its owner had friends in high places because he managed to wrangle himself a deal whereby he could get himself all the dirt-cheap labor he needed so long as they were all troubled youths facing jail time. I guess that sounds real exploitative or whatever, but looking back on it, I'm not sure it was the farmer who benefited more. I guess I can't speak for the other kids, but working in that place sure as hell saved my ass. And sometimes I think it just might have been a stroke of genius sending us to that place, because picking up trash on the side of the highway is one thing, but seeing how putting time and love into something really can create something beautiful, it fixed a part of my brain I didn't know needed fixing. I made friends at the farm that I still talk to. Granted, it's on Facebook because we live at opposite ends of the country now, but the point still stands. It gave me discipline and self-belief, which is amazing considering I showed up expecting it to be nothing but baby jail. But then, I guess it's the irony of ironies that all of the crazy stuff I did on the street, it all kind of pales in comparison to something I went through at the farm. So when you first got to the farm, you were assigned a job and a roommate. Your job could be anything from livestock and crop management to irrigation or pest control, but your roommate was there for one purpose alone: to help break you into the routine and make sure you stayed on track. These roommates were ideal for the role because the system was working for them and they could talk from the heart about how it could work for the newbies too. And that's how it worked with my mentor anyway, and when it came time, I gladly accepted the role myself. I knew it'd be a challenge, and I'm sure I myself was a challenge when I first arrived, but I also knew that I had to give something back before I left the program and moved on with my life. Not everyone made it to mentorship level, and as cheesy as it might sound, I considered it an honor and a privilege. For the first time in my life, I felt truly appreciated and wanted to share my own appreciation in return. So around 9 months into the program, I'd risen to the position of livestock supervisor and had been given my own 2-bedroom living quarters in preparation for receiving my mentee. Obviously, the dorms were very strictly divided by gender, so I knew my mentee was going to be female. But what I didn't know, and had no way of knowing until I met her, was how cooperative she was going to be. If she was chilled out, repentant, and receptive, then the next month would be an absolute breeze for me. But then if she wasn't, I knew things could get very rough. I'd already heard a bunch of horror stories and how troublesome uncooperative mentees could be when the rubber really hit the road, and in 1 or 2 classes, fights had broken out between the mentors and their roommates. I really didn't want that to happen, so my whole game plan focused on pacification and building a rapport between myself and my mentee. Pretty much the exact same tactic my own mentor took back when I first arrived at the farm. So, the day my mentee was due to arrive, I was actually really excited to meet her, and I wasn't in the least bit discouraged by her attitude upon arrival. Now, she obviously didn't want to be there, but very few did upon first touching down, so I understood her reticence and took it in my stride. Since I was still in livestock, she accompanied me on a few days' work with the animals after her induction was finished. And although she really didn't take to it at first, she warmed up with time and showed rapid improvement. She was due to be with me for a month, and the month could have either been very short or very long, and by about week 2, it was looking like it was going to be the short kind. Shauna, my mentee, was fitting and well, and although her attitude needed major work sometimes, we were making some major breakthroughs together. And then came the day that the cops arrived, 2 of them, and I spotted them talking to a very concerned-looking group leader. I walked over, mainly intent on listening in on what they were saying, but when the group leader spotted me, she called me over to talk. I found out the cops had driven all the way out from the city because they were looking for someone, and that someone just so happened to be my mentee, Shauna. They didn't just want to talk to her either. She had a warrant out for her in another county, and they were there to arrest her. Obviously, this kind of presented us with a very precarious situation, because we didn't know how Shauna was going to react to all this. She could potentially be going back to jail for whatever she'd done, so if she saw the cops coming, she might just try and run. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time, and she's been so volatile at the beginning that no one could be 100% sure about what she'd do. But then, as we were thinking about it, I had an idea. If I could go and talk to her first and break the bad news, it might be received better coming from me instead of cops. I remember how, when I was on Oxys, just the sight of a cop would give me major anxiety. And I don't know, maybe in another life I'd have made a run for it too. And all that progress, all that hope, so suddenly and cruelly being taken away. It was a nightmare, but one that was about to be Shauna's reality in the next couple of minutes, unless I was there to soften the blow. Once the plan was agreed upon, I walked off towards the dorms to where I was pretty sure Shauna was just kind of chilling in her room. She was right where I expected her to be when I walked in, and I sat down in the bed opposite her and told her how we needed to talk. I think she genuinely had no idea that that other warrant was out for her, because when I dropped the news, she was devastated. To say it was emotional would be the understatement of the century, and she actually did bring up the idea of just running off before the cops could see where she went. But then somehow, I managed to talk her into just going with the cops to see what the warrant was about, because it was better to face the music than run from it and make things worse. The thing that really seemed to convince her was when I asked her if she was 100% truly certain that she didn't know what the warrant was about. Then when she gave me yet another convincing no, I told her that it couldn't have been that serious. She'd remembered robbing a liquor store or shooting someone, but if she seriously didn't remember and wasn't blackout drunk when it happened, then it couldn't have been any worse than a missed court date or a traffic violation. Shauna calmed down a little, like, damn, you're right. And after promising that the group leaders would put in a good word for her so that she might be able to come back, she agreed to follow me over to where the cops were waiting. I remember how we were walking side by side after we left the dorms, but when we turned the corner of the community hub and the cops came into view, Shauna slipped from my side and started to drop back just a little. It was obviously just a little hesitancy on her part, but I figured we were over that and kept encouraging her. But when I looked back in her direction after she totally slipped from me, I didn't notice that she was reaching for something. But she must have been, because I looked back towards the cops and the next thing I know, there's a knife at my throat. I just froze for a few seconds, and feeling the knife to my throat was one thing, but realizing it was Shauna that was holding it was another thing entirely. I was completely blindsided, and all I could do was just stand there as Shauna held my head with one hand and the knife with the other, as cops drew their weapons and started to approach. Shauna started telling me to walk backwards, which I did, but I think the movement kind of kicked my brain into life because the words, "What are you doing?" just started tumbling out of my mouth. I said stuff like, "Shauna, what are you doing? Shauna, think about what you're doing." And And she responds, "I know what I'm doing. I'm not going to jail. I'm getting out of here." All the while, the cops are screaming to put the knife down, but all Shauna seemed focused on was walking backwards and not cutting my throat on accident. I remember telling her, "They're going to shoot you, Shauna. They're going to kill you if you don't stop." And she just yelled at me to shut up and keep walking, which again is what I did. Kids had come running to see what was going on because they could hear all the yelling. And so as we're walking backwards, almost hip to hip, there's this big gathering of kids all watching from near the community hub. And it was chaos. But I never once believed Shauna would ever do me any harm. It was just a desperate attempt to avoid going to jail, and as soon as she got to the trees over near the livestock fields, she was going to make a run for it. But that's not what happened. There was about a minute where I was trying to convince her to let me go, but Shauna was too busy trying to get the cops to keep their distance. She was yelling at them to stay back and all this other stuff, and totally ignoring anything that I had to say to her. But then there was this moment when she stopped, and it was like she came back to me for a second. At first, she told me to shut up again, but I kept telling her how what she was doing wouldn't work. If the cops didn't catch her on foot, she'd end up running from them on her own in a place where she was unfamiliar with. If she stuck to the roads, she'd be in cuffs within hours, but if she stuck to the woods, it'd be her versus the bears and cougars and Mother Nature. And I told her again, "This won't work, Shauna." And in reply, she told me, "Yes, it will, because they'll be too busy trying to save you than to chase me." I could write all night, I guess, and still not even get close to how terrified those words made me feel. And like I said, I was 99.999% convinced that Shauna meant me zero harm and had just panicked when she realized she was going to jail. But maybe she even remembered what the warrant was about and remembered that it was way worse than she first thought. Who knows? Not like she's around to ask her either. And the last thing she yelled as she intended to draw the blade of that knife across my throat was, "I'm sorry." But she didn't just say it, she yelled it. And I guess that was all the cops needed to hear. She yelled that apology, and I felt the blood hit my face. But it wasn't mine. It was Shauna. After one of the cops heard her cry, took aim and pulled the trigger. I had a tiny cut where the knife nicked me as she fell, but other than that, I was completely unharmed. Shauna, on the other hand, was probably dead before she even hit the dirt. The cop put the bullet right through her brainstem, and there was a hole in her face between her nose and her eye. I just started screaming. Like I didn't know if I had been shot, how bad the cut to my throat was, because, like I said, it was bleeding a little and I was in a state of complete hysteria. I got down on my knees and started trying to wake Shauna up, like shaking her. I thought that there'd be a chance that she'd survive the shot. I mean, people survive crazy head wounds sometimes. But I think I just knew, maybe from the look in her eyes, that there was no more life inside her anymore. That day was the worst of my entire life. It's not something I'll ever get over either. I've just learned to live with it. I know Shauna had to die so that I might live, and I heard the sureness in her voice, and I know in my heart that she might have been about to kill me. But that doesn't mean that every single day I don't think about her and wish that she'd made a different choice.
To start off this story, this happened while I was in college. My sophomore year, I lived in the dorms and I was assigned to a random roommate. He seemed a little bit introverted but fairly normal at first, but he wouldn't really talk to me. I would try to start conversations about things he showed interest in, but he would only give me one-word answers that were obviously meant to end the conversation. I figured he probably just didn't like me, so I decided I would give him some space and leave him alone. After a few days, that's when it started. I would notice that he was always staring in my direction. I chalked it up to coincidence, but it continued happening. Classes started up, and I spent less and less time in the room, but whenever I was in there, he would be constantly looking in my direction. Whenever I would turn to face him, he would turn his head away from me, but it would creep me out since it was pretty much constant. I started noticing that he would lay on his bed to read, but he would always hold the book or papers at an angle that always gave him a direct line of sight to me. About a week or so into the semester, my girlfriend at the time and I went on a morning hike and crashed on my bed at around 2 p.m. We woke up to him just standing there staring at us about 2 hours later. He didn't say anything, just turned and left the room. It was at that point that I decided I needed to leave before he did something to me in my sleep. I got out of there pretty quickly. Fortunately, I didn't see him again for quite a while, but we ended up having a class together senior year. I had been telling my friends that story ever since it happened, and they didn't believe me. One of my friends had really poor vision, so we sat in the front row. Of course, every time I looked behind me, my old roommate was always staring directly at me. Not at the teacher, but at me. It didn't really matter if we were on the middle or on one of the sides. I challenged my friends to look back a single time during the semester and catch him not looking at me. Within 5 classes, they gave up, and they agreed that he was staring at me nonstop, and that he was indeed super creepy. My parents think he was in love with me, but I just think he was crazy. I guess I'll never really know what his deal was. So this happened at the end of summer of 2016. To give a bit of backstory, my boyfriend and I were both around 20 years old. So my boyfriend Max and I used to share an apartment with another married couple. Mind you, they were pretty awesome people. Unfortunately for us, Florida wasn't what they wanted, so they decided to move to Pennsylvania. Max and I started looking for people to replace them with because of rent, and it was pretty pricey, and we didn't want to have to pay for the whole thing all on our own. It was in a very nice area, but not close enough to the city, so most people that told us they would drop by to check the place out would flake out last minute. Eventually, we found this person that seemed to be a very nice and laid-back girl. She then explained to us how she was looking for a place for her boyfriend, Dan. Now, I tend to see people's auras when I meet them, and I always get a certain feeling when I don't like them immediately. I'm not a judgmental person in the slightest, it's just something I feel and can't help. I did not like this person straight off the bat, but I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt because everyone else seemed to be okay with him, so I thought I might be wrong, and I was hoping I was. As the time went by, said Dan started being super loud. He would invite people over on weeknights till 4 a.m. He would play music loud enough for it to sound like it was being played from our room, and multiple other annoying things, and also being beyond disrespectful, especially to me. Max wouldn't do anything about it, and I'm kinda glad because I know Dan would have wanted to fight him or something. Dan was 22 at the time, but he had the mentality of a 12-year-old. Side note, we later found out that Dan had some previous mugshots for shoplifting and other stuff. He also threatened to beat me up several times. Yeah, me, a 20-year-old girl. I just wanted to give you a bit of insight on Dan so you understand what is coming up. Buckle up. It was a Wednesday night, and I got home at around 5:30. As I was walking upstairs and almost to the 3rd floor, which is where we lived, I saw him coming out of the apartment, but I don't say anything because we don't like him, so I just mostly ignored him. He then started yelling at me and telling me to look at the apartment. I looked inside from the doorway and I saw nothing wrong, so I asked what he was talking about, and still in an angry voice he claimed that he had been robbed and that he had also just gotten home to this. But I saw all the furniture is there and whatnot, so I didn't really know what he was going on about. I then went inside and I noticed that my Wii U was gone, but the rest of my consoles were there. So at this point, I was already getting pretty suspicious of him. I tried to keep calm as much as I could, and I called Max to see how far from home he was. We usually both got home around the same time. As I'm calling, Dan yelled at me again that he had called the cops and that they were on their way. And in these exact words, he then said,
"Do whatever you need to do, because the police are on their way."
When he told me that, I immediately knew he had been home for a while, because he must have had time to hide all of his weapons and drugs, and God knows what else he had. Within about 5 minutes, the cops were pulling in, and so was Max. One officer went upstairs with Dan and Max to write down everything that was missing, and the other officer stayed downstairs. I stayed with him, just chatting. According to Max, we're missing a lot of our stuff in our room, but Dan is only missing his PS4. I did ask him at last if it was possible to search Dan's car, and I also said if he needed to search my or Max's car, we'd be okay with it. He said it wasn't necessary, but agreed to search Dan's car. Once they all came back downstairs, the officers asked Dan if they could search his car and that they also needed his ID. He said he was okay with them searching his car, but that he had to get his ID and keys from the apartment. Max and I followed him upstairs. We saw him get his wallet and keys and he left the apartment. We don't want to be nosy and stay downstairs while they search his car, so we decided to stay in the apartment. A few minutes go by and he's still not downstairs with the cops, so we started looking around the neighborhood, but he had already vanished. How convenient, but since he had agreed that they could search his car and in no moment said that they couldn't, they went ahead and started looking if the car was unlocked, and it was. We found all of our stuff in his car. In the car was our 3DS, our PS4 controller, Max's laptop, some Wii U games, and a lot more. The very next morning, I decided to put all of his stuff out by the dumpster and then had a locksmith change our locks. I thought of putting a restraining order on him, but we ended up never going through with it. A few weeks later, we saw his car parked outside a few yards from our building, but we pretended like we didn't see him and we just watched him from our room with 911 ready to be dialed. Eventually he just left and he didn't cause any more problems. But still, Dan, I really hope we don't encounter you ever again. So, about 3 years ago, I was going to a school in a US city, and I was living with 2 other roommates. One of my roommates was pretty well known to usually bring city characters back to the apartment. At one point during our fall semester, she befriended a guy in her advertising class who went by the name of Dallas. He became her weed dealer, and she would frequently bring him over to the apartment. I suspected they were sleeping together, but she always denied it. It was a strange relationship, but who am I to judge? My other roommate and I thought he was charismatic enough, but we also didn't see the appeal that Christy saw. I remember one night when we had Dallas over for dinner. He told us how he played for our college's football team and that he started his own business at the age of 25. He was a very well-known weed dealer who made a crap ton of money, and his name was Dallas because he used to live in Dallas, Texas, and apparently that's what his parents named him after. Me and my other roommate nodded our heads and listened, but we didn't think much of it except for this dude thought he was hot stuff and wanted to gloat about himself. Mind you, he was like 5'4" and probably not over 150 pounds. I believe he came over for dinner maybe about 2 more times after that. My roommate claimed that one time she decided to buy weed from him and went to his apartment off campus. When she arrived, she saw our roommate Christy just pass the crap out on a chair in the middle of the day in Dallas's apartment in some random room. When my roommate arrived, he mentioned nothing of her being there. My roommate shook her awake and Christy just woke up in a haze and basically told my roommate to screw off. My roommate recounted the story to me, and we both agreed it was pretty freaking weird, and Dallas was probably not the safest person to hang with. After a couple of months, Christy stopped hanging out with him. I remember her saying he got pissed because she didn't want to sleep with him. I also found out that a friend of hers who knew him for a long time was engaged to him. Oh, and also, his real name wasn't Dallas. I mean, real shocker there. Fast forward 2 years. Neither me or my roommate talk to Christy anymore. We're living elsewhere in said city doing our own thing. We get an alert on our phones that a girl who had just transferred to our college went missing after leaving one of the campus bars the previous night. It doesn't take very long, maybe a few days, when this huge story breaks. Apparently, this girl was killed by someone she left the bar with that night. So I get a call from my roommate, and the call goes something like this. Dude, do you remember what Dallas's real name was? Yeah, I believe it was something like Michael or something. She replies back with, go online and read this article. He freaking killed that girl who just went missing. Sure enough, I go online, and there is the most creepiest mugshot of Dallas, next to a photo of the girl he had just slain. Well, it gets crazier. Apparently he had taken her home that night. I'm assuming it was a one-night stand sort of thing. So I guess at one point things turned bad and he killed her by blunt force and strangulation. And if that isn't terrible enough for you, he cleaned up the evidence in his apartment, threw her body in a storage container, and took a freaking lift to his grandma's house hours away. And then he buried the storage container with her remains in it on the property somewhere. After obtaining a video of the 2 of them leaving the bar together, it didn't take the cops very long to find him. Weeks after that story broke, so many different girls came forward and shared similar creepy stories about Dallas, the guy who played college football and ran a successful business. You can guess that none of this was ever true. Also, he was like 28 years old, claiming he was still a student at our college when this all happened. when in reality he was probably just there prying on younger women. It's truly a horrible story what happened to that young girl.
I used to work night shift security, and by far the scariest thing I had ever encountered was when I chanced upon a robbery in progress. I was patrolling one of our assets around the start of my shift at 10 p.m. Walking around the perimeter of the building, everything looked in order, except an air conditioner near ground level that had fallen out of place. The air conditioner didn't fit well in the hole, so there had been a wooden plank to prop it up and keep it in place. I assumed that the stick had somehow been nudged and the AC unit had fallen out of place. It wasn't very heavy, so I propped the air conditioner back into its hole in the wall, positioning the stick to keep it in place. I continued my walk around the building, reaching the next window, and to my surprise, someone was there. The light in the room wasn't on, but there was a bit of light entering the room from the hallway that the office space was connected to. It wasn't uncommon for a worker to stay working late on a project, or either use their code to re-enter the building and grab something they had forgotten earlier. I pressed my face to the glass to see who it was and if I would recognize them. Once I was peering through the glass, I could make out that it definitely wasn't an office worker. The person was wearing a ski mask over their face. They noticed my face pressed up against the window and hustled out of the room. Realizing that a robbery was in progress, I quickly put two and two together, figuring out that the fallen air conditioning unit hole was most likely the way they had entered the building. I immediately pressed a button on my phone in an app that my company used to notify police if they needed to send cars to my location. I was still standing only about 100 feet away from the AC unit, so I ran over to see if that was going to be how the perpetrator would attempt to escape. Sure enough, shortly after I had reached the AC unit, it came flying out at me as the intruder pushed it forcefully from inside. The AC unit was knocked straight backwards into my chest, and I watched as the person in the ski mask flew through the hole in the wall, barreling into me and the AC unit that I had somehow managed to catch. The suspect ran into a nearby neighborhood, but the police arrived soon after and had them cornered in a city block, shutting down the entire street and eventually capturing them. It felt good to say that I had stopped an attempted robbery in progress, but I'll never forget the image of the person flying through a dark hole in the wall directly into me. It was quite terrifying, and I had nightmares about it for the next couple nights afterwards. I worked at a hotel for many years when I was younger. I eventually got promoted and earned better pay and shift hours, but when I was first working there, I was on the night shift. The night shift was from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., and the only workers in the building would be me and another person working at the front desk check-in area. The hotel wasn't a 5-star hotel by any means, but it was fairly nice, but most people we encountered and checked in the middle of the night weren't problematic. One night at about 2 a.m., a grumpy-looking middle-aged man came in asking for a hotel room for the night. We got him set up with his room, and then asked for the payment before giving him his room keys. He informed us that he wasn't able to pay currently, but would pay before he left in the morning. We clearly weren't allowed to do that, so we informed him that he could either pay for his room now, or he wouldn't be allowed to stay here. The man got quite angry and proceeded to cuss us out. The other guy I was working with that night, who was much more confrontational than I am, stepped out from behind the front desk, telling the man to leave or he'd make him leave. I was about ready to call the cops, when all of a sudden, the man took off into the hotel, running down the hallway. Both of us workers jogged out into the hallway a bit to see him enter a stairway and appear to head downstairs towards the hotel's basement. The hotel's basement was already creepy enough as it was, being much older than the rest of the hotel and having a bunch of storage stacked high everywhere. My coworker wanted me to go down there with him, but as I said, it was already creepy enough without the possibility of a crazy man down there. I called the cops, and they came to search the basement, where they found the man hiding in the storage area with a knife in his hand. They were able to detain him without anybody getting hurt. I'm so glad that I didn't let my coworker talk me into us going down there. Who knows what the man would have done if it had only been us two to find him down there instead of a group of police officers. We didn't get any more shady characters like that during the time that I was on the night shift, but I still felt a bit relieved when I got promoted and was able to work regular hours during the daytime.
I was born and raised in North Dakota. Back when I was in high school, a group of us would research murders that occurred out in the county. We would then go out and find the scenes and film the exploration at night. It was something to do while we got wasted on shitty beer and just teenage bullshit. Eventually, we ran out of places to go and got really good at finding abandoned rural farmsteads by driving dirt roads and just looking for signs. Rut roads, deliberate tree groves, and old mailbox posts were common markers. We were out looking when we spotted a tree grove that was out of place and drove through the field and discovered an old, but not too old, house. It had padlocks on the outside doors that were knocked off pretty easily. We dispatched of them and entered the kitchen. There were 6 of us, all with flashlights, and we lit up the kitchen/dining area fairly easy. The table was the initial thing that you noticed, and it was strange because of how normal it actually looked. It was set for a meal. Not a bowl was out of place. The only thing was, we'd been in dozens of these houses, and place settings were a first, especially unbroken ones. As we investigated the area, we found the fridge had the disgusting remnants of a full stock, and the cupboards were full of canned and dry foods. This was definitely also a first. One guy found mail on the counter from early June 1978, and another found a creepy-ass TV guide in the living room with UFOs on the cover. All the family photos were still hanging up. Mom, dad, brother, sister, in their 1970s glory. The furniture was dusty, but in good condition. Closets were full. Everything was totally normal, which was abnormal. As we continued to dig around the house, we all started to realize that this house had not been moved out of. It had been straight up abandoned. Imagine locking the door to your house and just never coming back. That's the state this house was in. Complete, unplanned departure. We went upstairs and split into 3 pairs to check out the 3 rooms. Ours was the closest, and obviously it was the younger boy's room. I can't describe what it looked like too well because almost right away from the hall, we heard the most fucking terrifying scream that I've ever had the misfortune of hearing. We were running down the hallway, and we're all yelling questions at one another around the same time. After a few really long seconds, the 2 screamers caught their breath and said, "You have to go in and see," walking down the hall and through the doorway. I prayed that I wouldn't act like a pussy in front of my friends. I shouldn't have been concerned, because the others were as scared as I was. The room itself opened up, and to the left of the doorframe, and centered on the right side of the room, was a queenish-sized bed, propped up on the pillows with the blanket drawn to the waist, arms on top of the blanket, and worst of all, the head was turned slightly, so it was looking you straight in the eyes when you entered the room. It was a life-size porcelain doll. Snow white skin, jet black hair, cold, dead eyes. The dead eyes lit up our flashlights, like she was waiting for us. If the head hadn't been turned, I could excuse it, but it was turned, ready for you when you walked in. Ready for 20 years. Hasty fucking exits were made down those stairs and back into our car. It was during the ride we started to get even more creeped out, because we realized that even though the house had been abandoned, someone had taken the time to set up that goddamn doll. Not packing food, clothes, or family photos. Setting up the doll was one of the last things done in this house. We researched their names, but got nothing. No tragic car accident, no grisly massacre, no extended family. Just a tacky time capsule in the middle of nowhere. We found out that the county had been taking possession of the land for non-payment of taxes, explaining the locks. Never tracked down any more information on what happened to them, or why they left that fucking doll.
The following story occurred in the summer of 2005. I lived in Athens, Georgia, and attended the University of Georgia. At the time, my girlfriend, now wife, lived in Atlanta, which was about a 65-mile drive from my hometown. The highway which takes you to Atlanta from Athens is a 2-lane highway called 316. This is important information for the story. It was a Sunday evening. I had spent the weekend in Atlanta and was now driving back to Athens. In the summer, there are very few cars on the road on Sunday evenings, as many of the students go home for the summer. I was driving a black BMW SUV and was cruising along listening to music. I saw no cars for miles and was approaching a traffic light along 316. The traffic light was red, and I came to a stop alongside an old Mustang. It looked like one of those models from the 1980s, was black in color with a rag top. The windows of the vehicle were tinted. I didn't really give the car a second thought. I just sat there and waited for the light to turn green. When it did, the Mustang suddenly sped off with a squeal of the tires. As if the driver floored it from the idle position, the car sped off far in front of me. I was a bit surprised, but I just thought, another redneck, who cares? The Mustang was soon out of sight and out of mind. I continue driving along, and I'm back in chill mode again, when suddenly, a car with its high beams on appears directly behind me. What the hell? I quickly realized it was the same Mustang from before. They had been waiting alongside the highway for me. I nervously looked down to make sure my phone was still charging, just in case I needed it. It was. The Mustang switches lanes and flies up beside me, keeping pace for a few seconds. The driver then swerves in front of me, then suddenly brakes, bringing the car to a halt. I swerve into the other lane. The Mustang quickly speeds up beside me and starts swerving, trying to knock me off the road. They charge ahead again and try the same braking maneuver once more. At this point, I am freaking out. Now, I'm a 6'3", 220-pound male who works out all the time. I don't easily get scared. But in this situation, size did not matter. I note the license plate on the car and grab my phone. But as I do, the Mustang is suddenly beside me again and begins swerving. I jerk my wheel to the side, and my phone goes flying out of my hands into the passenger side door well. Shit! The Mustang is then behind me, flashing its brights, right on my bumper, speeding up, slowing down, blaring its horn, swerving from side to side. They suddenly take off and are soon out of sight. I take the opportunity to collect myself and drive the remaining 10 minutes to the turnoff road to Athens. I make a quick decision to drive to the police station to file a report. I had the license plate number memorized and had been reciting it over and over again. As I turn off the road to Athens, bright headlights fill my rearview mirror again, and the Mustang is behind me. It speeds past me, turns down another road, and is gone. I arrived at the police station and give them the license plate number. It's a fairly small station, and I think there was only one officer working. He tells me that it's probably somebody mistaking me for somebody else. He runs the plate number and tells me the owner of those tags is deceased. Holy shit. Now I'm really freaked out. I finish filing the report and head home. The story doesn't end there. Later that night, when I was on the phone with my girlfriend, someone outside beats loudly on my garage door several times. Before I could get out to see who it was, I heard a squeal of tires. I never saw a car, but I called the cops immediately, and there has never been any kind of follow-up. I didn't sleep for several nights after that. I'm 21 years old. This happened to me shortly after I turned 18 and graduated high school. My family moved to a new house in Texas. My mother claimed that it was so we could get a fresh start, but I knew the truth. She was ashamed of all the trouble that my sister Jocelyn had gotten into in our hometown. Weeks later, after we settled into the new house, Jocelyn disappeared. My mother received a phone call from my sister's parole officer. Apparently they found her in Atlanta. And to make a long story short, Jocelyn wasn't thrilled about the move, so she ran away to a friend's house. Unfortunately, I couldn't fly back to Georgia with my mom, and I had no choice but to stay in Texas. The next morning after my mom left, I went for a jog around the new neighborhood to familiarize myself. It was when I stopped to catch my breath and change playlists on my phone that I felt a cold feeling creep up my spine. It was the unmistakable sensation that you get when you're being watched. I looked around. but there was nothing out of the ordinary. But I knew that someone was watching me from somewhere close by. I decided to cut my walk short. As soon as I reached my house, I locked the doors and immediately ran upstairs to take a quick shower. While I was washing up, I heard a faint thud from downstairs. I quickly turned off the shower and listened. Another thud followed. I quickly threw on my clothes and ran downstairs to check things out, but there was nothing. The front and patio doors were locked, so I was left feeling a little confused. Trying my best to keep my composure, I was finally able to breathe when my mom called to check up on me. I didn't want my mom to be worried about me. She was already stressing out enough because of the situation with my sister, so I told her that I was fine and that I was going to order takeout and chill for the rest of the day. Later that night, around 10 p.m., I finished up my dinner while binge-watching How to Get Away with Murder on Netflix and eventually fell asleep on the couch. I suddenly woke up a couple of hours later. It was around 1 a.m., and the room was freezing. The thermostat showed 42 degrees. That's when that dreadful feeling came back. I felt like a deer being eyeballed by an apex predator. Danger was close by. My stomach felt like I was doing somersaults. Something was very wrong, and that's when I noticed that my phone was missing. After a brief search on the couch, I couldn't find it. Annoyed, I decided to use a website called Text Now on my laptop. It's a free online service that I sometimes use to track my misplaced phone. Trembling, I typed in my number. Almost immediately, the ringtone abruptly stopped, and that's when I heard heavy breathing coming from the other end. I barely had enough time to respond when I heard a knocking on the glass of the patio doors. I grabbed an unscrewed bedpost from the closet before checking things out. When I looked out through the doors, my heart stopped. Holding my phone was a dark figure in a goat mask. Before I can make out any other details, the masked man slid my patio door open. At the speed of light, I burst through the front doors and headed for my neighbor's house across the street. There, I banged on the door until an older woman came to greet me. She immediately called the police after I explained everything to her. The cops arrived 10 minutes later, and after a thorough search of my house, they found no trace of the intruder. After that ordeal, there was no way I was staying in that house alone, so I asked the officers if I could accompany them to the station, to which they obliged. While I was at the station, one of the officers informed me that they had located my phone outside the house. However, since there were no fingerprints on it, added to the fact that I couldn't give a detailed description of the assailant, it was a dead end. There was one last unpleasant surprise when I unlocked my phone to call my mom. Upon seeing what was in my photo gallery, my blood ran cold. The officer saw that I was uneasy and asked me what was wrong. I handed him the phone. There was about 15 videos of me sleeping on the couch, each nearly 3 minutes long. The masked man that I saw had been inside my house and was watching me while I was sleeping. I felt so violated that I became nauseous and called my mom and told her everything. Hours later, she and my sister came straight from the airport to come get me. We didn't live in that house much longer after that. For the longest time, I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had woken up with that man standing over me. Perhaps I wouldn't be here to tell you this story. It took a while, but I finally came to terms with what happened. But I would be lying if I told you that this experience doesn't haunt me to this day. This story took place during my early childhood, so I'll share events that I can recall. It's mostly bits and pieces. There are some things that I can remember in great detail, and some that I can only vaguely recall. So I'll do my best to try to piece things together without getting off track. I have 2 sisters. I'm the middle child. They also remember a good majority of this as well. This happened back in mid-2003. I was 5 years old back then. My 2 sisters were about 4 and 7. So my parents hired a babysitter. Her name was Julie. She had been friends with my mom in high school. She actually lived with us for a while. All I really remember about her was that she was very tall, skinny, and had dark blonde hair that was always tied up. We lived in an apartment complex at the time. It was a place called Oats Creek. So Julie babysat us while my parents worked. She even ended up dating one of my dad's coworkers, which brought a few jokes at my dad's job about him being a pimp. Basically, she became a family friend. Not long after that is when Julie started to change. She started getting very impatient and rude, and even straight up abusive to us, mostly targeting my sisters. My older sister once told me that she thinks that Julie possibly tried to kill her, and in response she grabbed a bottle with green liquid inside of it and tried to force her to drink it. She didn't know what this substance was, and she couldn't get into great detail about the incident itself. I guess her memory isn't as good as mine. Julie would get physically violent with us over the stupidest reasons, such as accidentally knocking something over or spilling a drink. We were just kids. Of course, she only did this when my parents were at work. That was until our family cat attacked her. Julie closed the door with my little sister's hand still in the doorway. It was an accident, or at least I think it was. This, of course, hurt my little sister, who started crying in pain. That's when our cat jumped onto Julie's leg and latched on with her back claws. She was biting and swatting at her, with her tail puffed out, hissing and everything. Basically, she snapped. My parents were a bit surprised, as our cat wouldn't even hurt a fly. It was around this time that they started to suspect that Julie was a bit of a whack job. She still continued to watch after us while my parents worked. This is where my memory gets a little hazy, as if my mind is trying to block something out. There was one occurrence that I still remember to this day, 18 years after the fact. In our room, my older sister had her own twin-sized bed. Me and my little sister shared a bunk bed on the other side of the room, and I slept on the top bunk. Anyway, one night, my little sister woke me up because she couldn't sleep. So she climbed up on the top bunk and we started talking quietly. After a while, she said, "Hey, watch this. I can hang off the edge without falling." However, she slipped and fell to the ground, and I started screaming and crying. That's when Julie storms into the room, yelling and cursing, and spanked my sister with one of my dad's belts. She then picks her up and throws her onto the bottom bunk, and screams for her to go back to sleep, and then storms out, slamming the door behind her. Julie was so enraged that she didn't even see me watching her. I was frozen, completely in shock. I didn't know what to do. I can only remember one time clearly where Julie physically struck me. As I said earlier, she mainly went after my two sisters. I can't remember the exact details, and she smacked me across the face. I don't remember why I did it, probably because she was yelling at us about something stupid, which was usual. She told my parents, and then my dad asked her, "Well, what did you do to set him off?" She then got pissy with him and said, "He was just a disrespectful little sh." Eventually, not long after that, Julie went away for good, moved on elsewhere. When she was finally gone, that's when me and my sisters came clean to my parents about everything. Julie struck us several times and yelled at us constantly. My parents can't really remember most of these events, as their memories aren't that great either. But I'm pretty sure they felt absolutely terrible for us, having to go through all this. We never saw or heard from Julie again. I don't know if my parents ever confronted her about anything, but they definitely cut her out of our lives for good. They never contacted the police as there wasn't really any proof of abuse. Everything was all hearsay. Neither of my parents ever caught her actually doing anything. I wish they would have. I'm not sure why my sisters or myself never said anything sooner, like when Julie wasn't around. I'm pretty sure she made threats to us if we did, and perhaps we can't remember. Years later, we found out that Julie had been arrested and served time in jail. Unfortunately, we never found out the exact reason why. Sometimes we all still talk about these events, and I know that I'll remember this for the rest of my life. So yeah, that's my abusive babysitter story. Julie, burn in hell. This happened during my junior year of college. For context, I'm a 22-year-old female. I was driving from my hometown in the Chicago suburbs to the University of Missouri, which is about a 6-hour drive. I made this drive about every 4 to 6 weeks to see my family and my long-distance boyfriend. There were two main ways to take to the town that my university was in: stay on the interstate system throughout central Illinois and to St. Louis, or branch out on back roads after Springfield, Illinois, until picking the interstate back up about 30 minutes from my college. I usually took the back road simply because it kept me awake with the constant speed limit changes and the occasional towns that I would have to go through. But on this particular time, I took the interstate system all the way there because there was high potential for winter weather. So I was minding my own business, listening to one true crime podcast after another, when about an hour from my exit, traffic came to a standstill. Great, I thought. It was already way beyond dark at this point. It was also a Sunday night, and I just wanted to get home to catch a decent night's sleep before my Monday classes. After a while, emergency vehicles flew past the traffic on the shoulder, indicating that there must be some kind of accident up ahead. After what felt like forever, traffic slowly started crawling again, and eventually picked up pace as soon as we all passed the accident. That's when it started. I will admit that I do like to drive fast on the interstate, especially on this particular drive. What college kid doesn't? I was in the right lane with a decent amount of space between me and the car in front of me, and that's when I noticed someone right on my bumper. Seriously? I muttered out loud. Traffic was no longer super heavy, and the person could easily pass me in the left lane. Suddenly the car began flashing their brights at me and honking. I was extremely confused. I turned off my podcast and kept a close eye in my rearview mirror. The person continued to flash their lights, half blinding me in the darkness, flooring it to the left lane. I maneuvered around a few cars, attempting to get away from whatever issue this person had. Except they followed my every move. Now, being a female in my early 20s, I began to feel sick to my stomach, and I listened to enough true crime and general horror stories to just be the right amount of paranoid. I had read on social media recently about girls from my school encountering sex traffickers in my town and along the interstate that runs through it. One of the town's papers had even ran a series of stories regarding multiple sex and human trafficking rings used around this interstate for capturing victims, because it basically runs the length of the entire country. I shook the disturbing thought out of my head and continued doing about 85 miles per hour in the right lane, unless I had to go around someone. The car continued to follow me, flashing its lights and barely letting themselves ever get more than a few cars behind. I finally took the exit to my university and looked back, and the car was still behind me. It seemed as though that this person was trying to get me to pull over. Is there something wrong with my car that I just can't see? I wondered silently. There was no way in hell I would be pulling over on the side of an interstate in the middle of a dark, rainy night. It's exactly how urban legends or teenage slasher movies start out. At this point, I had no idea what to do. Looking back, I really should have drove straight to the local police station, but I was too flustered and scared to even think straight. I tried to think back on the last hour or so of my drive. Had I cut anyone off? I don't think so. I'm a relatively good driver, and I tend to mind my own business on the road, not engaging in any road rage or anything stupid like that. So I stupidly began driving to my apartment. The car continued to follow, still flashing their lights every so often, but no longer honking. They continued to stay glued to my bumper, and that's when I started to panic. What if they followed me all the way home? What the hell should I do? Call the police and send them on some wild goose chase to look for me in this car while I'm driving around town? As I approached another small exit off of a local highway onto a smaller street that ran past campus and toward my apartment, I had an idea. As I got closer to my exit, I did not get in the far right lane to turn off. At the very last second, I jerked the wheel and careened across the gravel shoulder so close to the grass that I barely missed driving off the road. As I gunned down the exit ramp, I glanced up at the overpass. The car had come to a screeching halt and was honking its horn manically. I broke down in tears for the rest of the way home, calling my boyfriend and explaining what had just happened. I never got a good enough look at the car to get a license plate number, or even really a good description of the vehicle, so I never reported the incident to the police. I have no idea what exactly was happening that night. My best guess is that whoever this person was, they saw me when traffic was stopped on the interstate, waiting for the emergency vehicles to clear the scene. It's very clear from the stickers that I have on my car, one being my university's name, and one that says Dog Mom, that it was likely that I was a college-aged female. All this person had to do was end up next to me to see that I was a female driving alone on the interstate in the middle of the night and have just the wrong intentions. When I was in high school, I lived in a very small town in Texas. It was the kind of place where everyone was either related to each other or hated each other. I had no family there, so yeah. I did have a pretty blonde girlfriend, and was pretty hated for that too. Nothing major, just some petty harassment and occasional fighting. But at the time, things had been escalating. So that's why on Valentine's Day, my girlfriend and I decided to skip the school dance and just stay in and watch a movie at her house while her parents went out. It was just better to avoid any kind of trouble. We borrowed her dad's car, a little Honda hatchback, and went into town. We stopped at the video store, and afterwards we went to Dairy Queen and headed back to her house. Now, she lived in the boonies. It was out in the middle of the forest, along a lonely road, with no streetlights. We were chatting and eating our blizzards, when all of a sudden a car comes up behind us. No big deal. It became a big deal when the headlights flooded the interior of our car, and I saw a pair of hands on the back seat and the top of someone's head peering up from the hatchback. The lights had illuminated somebody hiding in the back of our car. As soon as the lights hit, the head and hands retreated back down. A solid chill ran through the entire length of my body. I slowly reached down and pulled out my pocket knife. It was the only thing I had. My girlfriend saw me and asked what was wrong. I then responded, "Nothing. I just had to stop at my friend's house real quick." She knew that was bullshit. I didn't have any friends. I pulled over at the next house that came up and jumped out of the car, yelling at her to do the same. She jumped out in total confusion. I flipped the driver's seat forward and lunged into the back seat in full maniac mode. The intruder popped up like a jack-in-a-box with empty hands waving. Hey, relax. What are y'all up to tonight?" It was some weird kid from our high school who we had never spoken to before, ever. "What in the holy are you doing in our car? I thought you guys were going to the dance." "I was just hitching a ride." We sat there staring at him with our mouths open, wondering what to do. He tried to act real cool, and obviously we were in the middle of nowhere in some random person's driveway. We ended up driving him to the dance and dropping him off. The whole time he was telling us to come inside with him. Yeah, not happening. We dropped his ass off and sped out of there as fast as we could. When we got back to my girlfriend's house, she began crying and was shaking. She was completely freaked out. I still have no idea what he was planning on doing when the lights caught him crawling out of the hatchback. This happened a very long time ago, and thinking about it now still creeps me out. I lived in Adair County, Kentucky on a horse farm. One summer day about 5 or 6 years ago, my mother, who's the horse enthusiast in our family, found a new horse she wanted to purchase in Lawrenceburg. We'll refer to the seller of this horse as James. Lawrenceburg is one of several places throughout Kentucky where people have claimed to have seen Kentucky's version of Bigfoot, the hillbilly beast. which has been sighted all over the state of Kentucky. My brother and I were suckers for that kind of thing, like most kids are. We decided to tag along with my mother, hoping that we would see it ourselves. When we arrived in town, James's house was located on the outskirts, miles from anywhere. Only a few houses were dotted here and there on the sides of the road, but there was one in particular I will never forget. We were about 5 minutes away from James's house and going slow because we had a trailer hooked to the back of our 4Runner. I was staring out the window, hoping to see the hillbilly beast hiding somewhere in the woods, when I saw a house. This house had well over 20 mannequins throughout their yard, all shapes and sizes. Most were lying down or propped against what looked like a shed, but there were two among them that really freaked me out. One was an adult female tied to a tree right next to the road, so close I could probably touch it if I rolled down the window and stuck my hand out. The second was the size of a baby. It was nailed to a tree only a couple yards away. Both of them looked really old and worn out, molding, rotting, etc. My mom stopped the vehicle, and we were all just sitting there staring at this place. The house was old and run down, but obviously someone still lived there. The shed that was right next to it appeared almost brand new, minus what looked like satanic graffiti written all over it. The three of us were totally freaked out. We drove away, heading toward James's house. Once we got there, we asked him about the freaky mannequin place down the road. James claimed that he never saw anything like that. He also said that he was just in town that morning and took that exact road, so it's likely he would have seen it. Once we left with the new horse, we took a different way home, so we didn't have to look at the mannequin house again. Part of me thinks this could have been some freaky prank, but another part of me wonders, what if some of them weren't actually mannequins?
When my dad and I moved into the small apartment, it was supposed to be a temporary solution while our house underwent renovations. We were adjusting to our new surroundings in the apartment complex, which for the most part was pretty quiet. Most of our neighbors kept to themselves, and life was uneventful, except for one family that lived a couple of doors down from us. The family consisted of a mother and her two adult children, a son and a daughter, both in their 20s. From the moment we moved in, it was clear that their household was far from peaceful. It seemed like every other day their arguments would spill out into the common areas of the complex. The son, a tall muscular guy with a constant scowl, and his sister, a petite woman with an equally fiery temper, were always at each other's throats. Their mother, a weary-looking woman with dark circles under her eyes, often tried to mediate, but her efforts were usually in vain. Despite the frequent disturbances, my dad and I tried to mind our own business. After all, we were only going to be there for a few months, and it didn't seem worth getting involved in someone else's family drama. But all of that changed on one sunny afternoon when the arguments escalated into something far more dangerous. I remember the day vividly. It was a lazy Saturday, and I was in my room, trying to focus on a book I'd been meaning to finish. My dad was in the living room tinkering with some electronics, his favorite pastime. It was the usual sounds of the apartment complex. Distant conversations, footsteps, the hum of the appliances providing a comforting background noise. Suddenly, the familiar sound of yelling pierced the tranquility. I sighed and tried to ignore it, thinking it was just another one of their routine arguments. But this time the yelling was different. It was more urgent, more desperate. I put down my book and walked over to the window, curiosity getting the better of me. What I saw next made my blood run cold. The mother and daughter were outside, backing away from the building with terrified expressions on their faces. The son was following them, his face twisted in rage, and in his hand, he held a large kitchen knife. He was shouting something unintelligible, but his intentions were clear. "Dad!" I yelled, my voice cracking with the panic. "Come here, quick!" My dad rushed to my side and looked out the window, His eyes widened as he took in the scene. Without a moment's hesitation, he grabbed his phone and bolted for the door. I followed close behind, my heart pounding in my chest. By the time we reached the footpath outside, the situation had escalated even further. The son was now only a few feet away from his mother and sister, who were backed up against the wall with nowhere to go. My dad, who had always been a man of action, didn't waste any time. He lunged at the son, grabbing his arm in an attempt to wrestle the knife away. "Call the police!" he shouted over his shoulder at me. I fumbled my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. My dad and the son were now locked in a struggle, the knife glinting in the sunlight as they fought for control. The mother and daughter watched in horror, too stunned to move. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice crackled through the phone. There's a man with a knife attacking his family. My dad's trying to stop him. We need help now. I blurted out, giving our address as quickly as I could. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but every second felt like an eternity. I watched in terror as my dad managed to pin the son to the ground, finally prying the knife away from his grasp. The son, surprisingly, didn't really resist much after that. He laid there breathing heavily as my dad yelled at him to stay down. Moments later, the sounds of sirens filled the air, and several police cars screeched to a halt in front of the complex. Officers rushed out, guns drawn, and then quickly took control of the situation. They handcuffed the son and led him away, still seething with anger but not putting up a fight. The mother and daughter then collapsed to the ground, now sobbing with relief. My dad, his face pale and his hands trembling, handed the knife over to one of the officers. I stood there still clutching my phone, feeling a mixture of fear and admiration for my father's bravery. One of the officers approached us and took our statements. The mother, once she had composed herself enough to speak, explained that her son had severe anger issues. She told us that he had been struggling for years, and this wasn't the first time he had become violent. She expressed her gratitude to my dad for stepping in and possibly saving their lives. As the police drove the son away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of uneasiness. What if he came back? What if the situation escalated even further next time? These thoughts swirled in my mind as we returned to our apartment, the adrenaline slowly wearing off. For the next few days, the apartment complex was unusually quiet. The usual sounds of life had been replaced by an eerie silence, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The mother and daughter kept to themselves, rarely leaving their apartment. About a month later, we noticed the son had returned. He looked different, more subdued, almost resigned. The mother had mentioned that he was undergoing treatment, but it was hard to believe that a month away could make such a drastic change. Surprisingly, there were no more arguments or yelling matches. The family seemed to have settled into a fragile peace, and the complex slowly returned to its normal state. But the incident had left a lasting impression on me. It was a stark reminder of how quickly life could change, and how important it was to be prepared for the unexpected. As for my dad and I, our bond grew stronger after that day. I had always admired him, but seeing him in action, risking his own safety to protect others, well, it made me realize just how lucky I was to have him. Our time in the apartment was temporary, but the lessons we learned and the experiences we shared during those months would stay with us forever. Eventually, the renovations on our house were completed, and it was time to move back home. As we packed up our belongings and prepared to leave the apartment, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The apartment complex, once just a temporary home, had become a place of growth and learning for me. I looked out the window one last time, taking in the familiar view of the footpath and the rows of the connected houses. The memory of that fateful afternoon was still fresh in my mind, but now it was tempered with a sense of resilience and hope. Life was unpredictable, but with my dad by my side, I knew that we could face whatever challenges came our way. As we drove away, I glanced back at the apartment complex, a small smile playing on my lips. It had been a place of turmoil and fear, but also of courage and strength, and I know no matter where life took us next, I would always carry those lessons with me. ready to face the future with a newfound sense of confidence and determination. My name is Bob, and I've been a fan of this channel for a long time. I'm an older viewer, probably a lot older than most. I'm almost 70 years old now, but the story I want to share happened when I was just 10 years old. Back in the summer of '64, I had a job delivering milk around my neighborhood. Yes, I'm that old. It was a quiet suburb with neat lawns, picket fences, and cozy homes. Every morning before dawn, I would load up my bicycle with clinking glass bottles and pedal through the serene streets. One thing that set our neighborhood apart: the mysterious Mr. Franklin who lived at the end of Elderberry Lane. His house was an old Victorian with dark curtains always drawn. Rumors said that he rarely came out during the day, preferring the cover of night for his activities. I noticed Mr. Franklin during my 3rd week on the milk route. After leaving milk on Miss Thompson's doorstep, another local in the neighborhood, I had felt a shiver down my spine. Turning around, I saw him, Mr. Franklin, standing in his overgrown garden, his pale face framed by messy gray hair. His unsettling smile made my heart race. From then on, I always felt his eyes on me during my deliveries. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of him behind his curtains or see his figure under a street lamp. It seemed that he was always watching but never approaching. As time passed, Mr. Franklin's presence became more real to me. My bike would be moved or I'd hear footsteps behind me in dark alleys. One foggy morning, I saw him standing far away under a streetlight. His smile directed not at me, but something behind me. A chilling sight that made me spin around in fear. Fear became my constant companion. I started taking different routes and avoiding quiet corners where Mr. Franklin might be lurking. Despite my efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Well, one really hot afternoon, seeking refuge from the heat in an abandoned warehouse, I overheard 2 men talking about Mr. Franklin. They spoke in hushed tones, warning each other about his collection of photos and letters about people in our neighborhood, more specifically some of the children in the neighborhood. They said he watched everyone closely and they needed to keep an eye on me. Well, I couldn't sleep at all later that night. The thought of Mr. Franklin's obsession with collecting information about us gave me the chills. Finally determined to confront him, I set out on my milk route at dawn the next morning. Pedaling down Elderberry Lane, I gathered my courage and knocked on his door. "Come on in, boy."
Mr. Franklin's voice called from inside in a tone of kindness but also menacing at the same time. Mentally preparing myself, I entered his house. The air inside smelled musty from old books, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with files neatly labeled with names of people that I knew from the neighborhood. Mr. Franklin sat at a cluttered desk beneath a dusty chandelier. His smile when he turned to face me was eerie, yet there was a hint of anticipation in his eyes. "You've been watching me," I accused, my voice trembling. Mr. Franklin's smile widened.
"Watching, yes. But don't worry. I'm not just watching you, my boy. I watch them all,"
he said, gesturing to the files around us. He explained that he was an observer, a collector of stories and lives, trying to understand and capture the essence of what it meant to be alive. His words carried a strange longing, a desire to connect with lives passing him by unnoticed. At this point, I was absolutely horrified, and I wanted out of his house immediately. But curiosity got the best of me. "Why?" I managed to ask, struggling to grasp his obsession. Mr. Franklin looked at me with a mix of disappointment and resignation.
"I want to know, to understand,"
he said softly.
"To possess something of the lives that surround me."
With a newfound resolve, I declared that I wouldn't be part of his collection. Mr. Franklin nodded sadly, and with a wave of his hand, he allowed me to leave. Walking away from Elderberry Lane that morning, I felt relieved yet haunted by the weight of Mr. Franklin's gaze. Over the years, the neighborhood changed.
replaced by modern streets and buildings. But the memory of Mr. Franklin and his unsettling obsession remained etched into my mind, a reminder of how darkness can hide beneath ordinary facades. Though I've moved on and built a different life for myself, there are nights when I find myself staring into the darkness, half expecting to see Mr. Franklin's figure with that unsettling smile. I've always been good at blending in, at becoming part of the background. It's a skill that served me well over the years, especially now as I watch her, the young woman in apartment 3B. From my vantage point across the courtyard behind the safety of drawn curtains and a partially open window, I observe her daily routines with a mix of fascination and longing. And if by now you couldn't already tell, this is a different kind of story, the one where I'm the creeper. Anyways, she doesn't know me. Not really. To her, I'm just another face in the building, perhaps a neighbor she passes in the hallway or nods to in the elevator. But to me, she is my everything. Her name is Sarah. I learned that from the mailbox one afternoon when I chanced to see her retrieve her mail. Sarah with the easy smile and the infectious laugh that echoes down the corridor on occasion. I know her schedule almost as well as my own. In the mornings, she emerges from her apartment at precisely 7:45, dressed for work in smart blouses and pencil skirts that accentuate her figure. She carries a sleek black briefcase and often stops by the coffee shop on the corner before then disappearing into the throng of the city's morning rush. I've imagined countless scenarios where our paths might cross naturally. Perhaps at the corner cafe where I could strike up a casual conversation about the weather or the latest news. But I know better than to risk the fragile fabric of my carefully constructed reality. No, it's safer to remain in the shadows, to watch and to wait. During the day, I occupy myself with mundane tasks, an errand here, a trip to the grocery store there, all the while keeping one ear tuned to the hum of life in the apartment complex. Occasionally, I'll catch glimpses of her through the frosted glass of her kitchen window as she prepares dinner or unwinds after a long day. Nights are the hardest, when the silence of the building presses in around me like a suffocating blanket. That's when I find myself drawn to the window, drawn to the faint glow of light from apartment 3B. Sometimes she reads, curled up on the couch with a book held close to her chest. Other times she watches television, the flickering screen casting shadows across her face. I wonder what occupies her thoughts during those quiet moments. Does she think of me, the faceless neighbor who watches her from across the courtyard? Or does she go about life, oblivious to the silent presence that hovers on the periphery of her world? I've tried to rationalize my obsession, to convince myself that it's harmless, that it's merely a passing fascination. But the truth is far more insidious. I can't tear myself away from her. The need to know her, to understand her. It consumes me in ways that I just can't explain. Tonight is no different. As I stand at the window, the darkness outside broken only by the soft glow of streetlights, my gaze inevitably drifts to apartment 3B. I see movement, a flicker of movement that draws me closer to the glass, my breath fogging the window pane. She's there, framed against the lamplight from the living room, her silhouette ethereal and distant. There's a vulnerability about her in these moments, a rawness that she only reveals when she thinks no one's watching. And yet, I'm watching. I'm always watching. Suddenly she turns, as if sensing my gaze from across the courtyard. My heart lurches in my chest, and for a fleeting instant, our eyes meet through the glass. Panic surges through me, threatening to unravel the fragile threads of my carefully constructed facade. But then she smiles, a small knowing smile that sends a shiver down my spine. Does she recognize me? Does she even understand the depths of my obsession, the lengths to which I've gone to remain hidden in plain sight? Or is it merely a trick of the light, a figment of my fevered imagination? I drew back from the window, retreating into the darkness of my own apartment. The weight of my guilt settles heavily on my shoulders, I know that what I'm doing is wrong, that my fixation on her is unhealthy and dangerous. Yet still, I find myself drawn back to the window, drawn back to the quiet sanctuary of apartment 3B. For in those stolen moments of observation, I catch fleeting glimpses of a life that I can never truly be a part of. A life that only exists beyond the confines of my own fractured reality. And so I continue to watch, to wait, to yearn for a connection that may never come. For in the end, I'm nothing more than the watcher in the shadows, forever bound to the object of my obsession by the invisible threads of desire and regret. Hey everyone, I want to share a story that really shook up me and my boyfriend. A couple of years ago, I moved to the UK for university. It was a big move for me, but I needed to get away from my parents' toxic situation back home. My first year at uni was spent in student accommodation where I met some really awesome people and enjoyed my newfound independence. I didn't meet my boyfriend until later, but life felt good. By my second year, I decided to move into a house with some friends that we rented through the university. It was nice to have our own space and not worry about noise restrictions like we did in our small shared flat the year before. My room was on the ground floor with a window that looked out into a small yard. I'd often go out there to smoke. There was an old thin wooden door that led to the street where we kept our bins and stuff. The door could only be locked from inside the backyard, so we tied it shut with some strings to keep it closed properly. We had neighbors on both sides. On one side were 5 guys who seemed much older than university students. They were a bit strange. One day there was a police incident involving them. One guy had attacked his flatmates with a kitchen knife and set their kitchen on fire. It was really scary to see one of them covered in cuts and blood. My flatmates and I helped clean him up and gave him a shirt to wear. The police took the guy away who caused all the trouble, but the guy we helped out was odd. He talked nonsense and made unwanted advances towards me. We noticed that he smoked a lot of marijuana, but we tried to be helpful and didn't think much about it at the time. After that incident, I'd see him around sometimes whenever I was coming home from uni or running errands. He once approached me on the street near a corner shop and tried to start a strange conversation. I felt really uncomfortable and ignored him. He said something creepy like, "I'll wait for you in front of your house so we can talk." I brushed it off as a joke, bought my drink, and headed back home. But as I turned into my street, there he was with his flatmate sitting on my doorstep. I panicked and called my male flatmate to ask him to tell them to leave, but he wasn't home. I waited nervously until they finally left an hour later. I rushed back home, locked the door, and felt relieved. Despite this, things got worse. One day while smoking in the backyard, I noticed the wood door was open. The strings we used to keep it closed were cut. I closed the door again and put on a new string, assuming it was just a mistake by one of the flatmates. Those weird neighbors often fought loudly, which disturbed my flatmates and me at night. We got used to it after a while though. One evening, my boyfriend stayed over as usual. He woke up suddenly in the middle of the night because of a loud noise and whispering. He woke me up quietly, and we listened in the dark. Suddenly, the wooden door banged open, and we heard footsteps near my window. We froze as we heard the backyard door being shaken, like someone was trying to break in. Thankfully, our curtains were closed, so they couldn't see us. We were ready to dress quickly and escape through the window if they came in. Then we heard my window open some more, and one of the guys spoke in a language that we didn't understand. They were trying to get in. My boyfriend and I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, got dressed, and then ran out of the room and out of the house. I called my flatmates and then the police. Luckily, the police station was nearby, and they arrived in less than 5 minutes. I was in shock, and I don't remember much after the police came. They caught one of the guys, but the other escaped. Later on, they found him a few streets away smoking weed. The police searched their house and they found drugs and a huge kitchen knife. It really terrified me to think they were trying to break in with such dangerous intentions. I never did anything to provoke them, so I couldn't understand why they targeted me and my boyfriend. One of them was sentenced to 2 years in prison for carrying a weapon with intent to harm. I moved back home a few months later because I was so scared and I couldn't stop thinking about what would have happened if my boyfriend hadn't woken up. I'm still coping with the trauma to this day. I often wake up from the slightest noise and have nightmares, but I'm really grateful to have my boyfriend by my side. We talk about it often, which helps me feel better.
This happened when I was around 9 years old. I'm 25 now, and it's something I'll never forget. It still gives me goosebumps to this day. I live in a terraced house, and my neighbors and I have our own little patio. There's a small road 10 meters from my yard where people do their Sunday walks on. Only a small fence separates my small yard and a patio from that road. I live in a pretty crowded area with several of these terraced houses spread around in my neighborhood. So seeing people walking on that road is pretty normal for me. Seeing random people standing on my patio is not. When I was 9, I usually got home from school about an hour before my mom got home from work. I lived maybe 50 meters away from my school, so my mom figured I was mature enough to be home alone. It was only an hour or so before she got home. So this one day, I got home from school. I did the usual thing, which was to make sure that I locked the front door and double-check that the back door leading to the patio was also locked. Then I rushed up to my room upstairs to play as much PlayStation as possible before my mom came home and would make me do my homework. While playing, I heard this noise coming from outside my window. It was kind of like the sound of a cat, but my cat had been missing for over 3 months. A hope sparked within me, and I thought, oh my God, did he finally come back? I ran downstairs to check if it actually was my cat. The sight that met me gives me goosebumps again just writing this. There's a guy standing on my patio, a very tall man with black hair covering half of his eyes, making him look like a male version of the Ring Woman or something. I could hear him making this high-pitched sound, almost like a cat meowing. A brown liquid was running down from his mouth, and I could see him spitting out my dad's stomped cigarettes. He was actually eating from the ashtray. I was frozen, observing this. Eventually, I snapped out of it and screamed so loud that the man must have heard it. He didn't react, just kept eating from the ashtray outside. I ran upstairs to my room, locked the door, and called my mom, who then promptly called the cops. I've never been more terrified in my life. Laying in my bed, under my sheets, shivering with fear, as I continued to hear these high-pitched noises from that guy, eating cigarette stomps from the ashtray on my patio. Kind of blacked out for a moment, because the next thing I remember is the police arriving on the road by my yard. I hear them talking to the guy, saying stuff like, "Sir, what are you doing? Get over here or we will come down and arrest you," and so on. The man did not respond, but the high-pitched sounds was more frequent and got louder and louder. I then decided to look through the window, feeling safe that the cops were there now. I could see 2 police officers standing by my fence, one man and a woman. I no longer saw the creepy man, however, because he was standing directly 1 story under me and out of my field of view. The police jumped the fence, and I remember hearing that creepy man screaming louder than I'd ever heard anything before. He charged at the female officer with full force, and he knocked her out cold. The male officer then immediately tased the guy, leaving him shaking on the ground, still screaming. The policeman struggled to keep him on the ground while putting handcuffs on him, but eventually he did. After a little while, he managed to wake up the female police officer, who seemed to be badly hurt. He called for backup and an ambulance, and then he sees me standing in the window above him. The expression on my face must have been something else, because he just looked at me and said, "I sure hope you didn't see all that." Then I started to cry. By this time, neighbors started to arrive, wondering what the hell was going on. One of my neighbors, an elderly woman, made me come down. She took care of me until my mom came back home. The police then took the creepy guy with them in their car and left. But they promised they'd come back and talk to us about what had all happened. This is where my story takes an unexpected turn. The male police officer came back later that night and sat down with me and my mom to talk. He explained that the guy on my patio was actually diagnosed with severe autism. He had escaped from a facility where mentally challenged people lived. It was located around 5 kilometers where we lived. He explained that guy had actually been living in my house 5 years ago, but then he'd been forced to move when his mom and his only caretaker died. Poor guy probably thought he was going to find his mom in my house. He missed the routines, and he missed living there with his mom. The police had to move him from the house that time 5 years ago because he was extremely strong, and this was the reason he reacted the way he did when the police came that day. Still frightened, I told the police officer that they needed to make sure that this would never happen again, and he promised me that it wouldn't. After a few sleepless nights, my life kind of went back to normal, and the years went by and that man didn't come back. That was until 1 year ago. At this time, my mom and dad had moved out. I bought that house from them, and I'm still living there today. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the patio when I see this random guy stopping on the road by my fence. He just stood there, staring at me. I look at him and give him a nod, and then I hear it. Those same high-pitched noises. Holy... It's him. His hair had turned gray, but the high-pitched sounds made me realize who it was. My heart started racing, and I instantly remembered the reason why he was back. I realized that he must have managed to escape again, but because I kept my cool a bit longer than when I was 9, I started to realize how sorry I actually felt for the guy. 16 years later, and he was back to look for his mom. I decided to carefully ask him if he wanted to come down to the patio. He instantly jumped the fence. I started to think maybe he would knock me out like he did to that one police officer. He didn't. He just smiled. He looked at me and smiled. I offered for him to sit down, and he didn't respond. I offered for him to come inside, and he just started laughing. So we ended up going inside. His face lit up, pure joy. He was home. It reminded him of the life he had with his mother. It actually almost made me tear up. And all of a sudden, he sat down on my couch, turned on my TV, and switched directly to the cartoons. I sat and observed him for a while. He was just completely focused on them. I wanted him to just enjoy the moment, so I didn't say anything. I realized I had to call that facility and let them know what was going on. The caretakers arrived 10 minutes later. After a lot of convincing, he got back up, crying, and went back to the facility. I called the facility 2 days later, and we made a deal. His name is Tom, and I now consider Tom my friend. Every Sunday from the day he returned, Tom and his caretakers visit me to watch cartoons. They tell me it's the highlight of his week. It makes my heart warm. Now, for several years, my thoughts were, let's not meet guy on my patio eating from the ashtray. Now my thoughts are, let's meet every Sunday to watch cartoons with my friend, Tom. I was 14 years old, and it was just an average night, and it was around 9 p.m. Myself and my little cousin are at his house, and I'm babysitting for the night while my mom and aunt are shopping and my dad and uncle are at the movie theater. As we're sitting there, I started to feel really strange, like something was wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. So we just kept watching TV. That same feeling wasn't going away though, so I got up and walked to the back door to lock it. And when I came back through the kitchen, I saw what was causing my weird feeling. In the window, there's this very decrepit and homeless looking man, just staring at us. Protective mode turned on immediately, and I pretended like I didn't see that guy, and told my little cousin that we needed to go upstairs, because our parents would be home soon, and they wouldn't want him staying up so late. We went upstairs and I put him to bed, knowing damn well that there was a man outside, and I think that he wanted in. I was about 125 pounds and 5'8" at the time, and I played football for my school. If I remember correctly, I went downstairs and straight into the kitchen, and grabbed one of those meat tenderizing hammers. Turned back to the window, only he now wasn't there. I ran back to the front door and made sure that it was locked. Both the deadbolt and the knob were, and I ran back upstairs with the meat tenderizer. I went into my cousin's room and sat down in front of the door. He asked me what I was doing, and I told him not to worry about it and just to keep his head low. I called the cops, and then my dad and uncle. The cops were at least 30 minutes out, and my dad and uncle were 45 minutes. Then I heard it, a window shatter, and the sound of heavy boots walking around on our main floor. Quietly told my cousin to stay calm and hide under the covers and keep silent. I could hear that man walking around downstairs. It was horrifying. I gripped that damn meat tenderizer and just waited. Maybe 5 minutes or so pass, and then I hear the boots walking up the stairs. At this point, I was having a freaking heart attack. My cousin's door is no more than 10 feet from those stairs. I heard him opening up the door to my aunt and uncle's room, then the bathroom. He walked back downstairs, and I heard him open the door to the basement. 15 minutes later, the police showed up and burst into the house. It turned out that the guy was loose from a mental hospital 1 province away. I nearly had to battle a mental case when I was 14, and at one point, I was no more than a wooden door and 10 feet away from him. My parents started leaving me and my sisters home alone when I was around 13 or 14. Of course, the rule was to not let anyone we didn't know into the house. One night, there was a knock at the door. I went to the door and tried to look out, but I couldn't see anything. We couldn't pretend that we weren't there because the lights and the TV were both on. I opened the front door a crack, thinking that the person would be behind the screen door, but that wasn't the case. There was a man in his late 20s or early 30s just standing in our doorway. I shut the door quickly and told him to get behind the screen door. He obliged, and I cracked the door. Yes, I wasn't very smart, and latched the screen door. He told me a story about his vehicle breaking down the road and needed to use a phone. I said that I couldn't see his car, and he indicated that it was further down the road. Then I asked him why he walked past 2 houses right next door, and then walked to the one with no car in the driveway. And I could see that he was becoming agitated. Here's a general recollection of that conversation. "Look, are you gonna let me use the phone or not?" "No, my dad is sleeping and I can't let you go into his room to use the phone." "Okay, just bring the phone here and I'll use it then." "I'm not letting you in the house." "Just bring the phone to the door." "It won't reach, please leave." "Okay." I shut the door and lock it, and while my sister and I are talking about how scary that was, the side door handle begins to jiggle. That same man knocked and says, "Hey, will it reach this door?" At this point, I tell him to go to the neighbor's house and use their phone, and he starts to yell, "I bet your dad's not even home. Let me in. I want to talk to him." I told him, "Fine, I'll go get him." Then I went to my dad's room, got his shotgun, came out and racked it and said, "Here, meet my dad." The same man started cursing and calling me names, but he did leave. At least that's what I thought. He actually had gone around to another door and tried that one. Our dog, who was outside at the time, began barking at him. He proceeded to do something that made my dog yelp and cry out. I screamed out that I was calling the police, and he finally left. I felt really stupid for the entire interaction. I don't know if he was just a guy who needed a phone, but that whole experience was very creepy, and I was obviously ill-prepared for dealing with it at such a young age. This story happened to me back when I still lived at my parents' house. I was commuting to college at the time and had 3 siblings that also lived at home, my brother and 2 sisters. For some context, we lived on 5 acres in rural Ohio, surrounded on both sides by woods and farm fields. Additionally, during the week, my dad would normally leave for work around 2 a.m., so I always felt like it was my job to be the man of the house because he was gone during the times when you would imagine something sketchy happening. However, on this night, because it was the weekend, my dad was actually home. I woke up to the sound of my brother's voice trying to get my attention. We had separate rooms, but if you came out of our room, you could look down over the banister and see our front door. When I woke up, it took a few moments to get out of that haze and realize what was actually going on. I looked at the clock and it was around 2:30 a.m. My brother told me that there were 2 men at our front door. Now this really woke me up. We quietly walked out of my room to peek down and look down to the front door. When we looked, there was no one at the door, but I noticed my parents off to the side and out of view of the glass on that front door. I whispered down to my dad, and he told me that there were 2 guys who had been talking to one another and knocking at the door. Hearing my dad say this freaked me out even more. I went back into my room and grabbed my pistol, quickly shuffling down the stairs after looking to make sure that they were still not at the door. If they had been, they would have easily seen me coming down the stairs, as it's in direct view. My brother is right behind me as we head over to where my parents are, whispering to my parents to find out what was going on. Parents had awoken to the sound of our dog barking, only to find 2 men knocking loudly at the door. At this point, those 2 men returned and began knocking again. Despite the fact that no one had came to the door the first time, or that our dog was still actively barking at them, and also the fact that they were there at this time in the night, so late, and in a location where houses are spread out hundreds of yards away from each other. And again, knocking with the dog barking. It just made the situation even more terrifying. After a couple of minutes, the men walked away, and we all shuffled across the kitchen and into the family room to peek out those windows into our driveway. There was a black Cadillac sitting there, but no one was inside from what we could see. Immediately the question was, where did those guys go? They weren't in their car, and they were no longer at the front door. We would quickly get an answer to the question we just asked. All of a sudden, the handles to our back French door started jiggling, and they were actively trying to enter the back of our house, which entered into the kitchen. At this point, I just remember my mom frantically saying, "David," to my dad, as pure terror overwhelmed her. Then two things happened. Adrenaline filled my body as I prepared my handgun, horrified at the very real possibility that I might have to shoot these men. Secondly, my dad finally grabbed the phone and called the police and calmly told them what was happening. Thankfully, after a minute of jiggling, they stopped at the back door and disappeared once more, only soon to be back at the front door, knocking once again. After a few minutes, we suddenly saw the local police fly up in multiple cruisers with their lights turned on. As they whipped into our driveway and into our front yard, the two men bolted and attempted to run the long way around the house across the driveway. One of them disappeared out of view, but the other one was intercepted by an officer yelling for him to get on the ground. He didn't. He was immediately tased and fell. A few of the other officers went around the house after the other guy, and one of them came to talk to my dad and I as we came outside. They ended up finding the other man hiding in my sister's little playhouse in the backyard. It appeared that both of them were either drunk and or high, as the one who hid had cocaine on him. While they were both arrested that night, we never did find out what they were charged with or what happened to them. Needless to say, that whole experience wasn't fun. So to the random men at our door in the middle of the night, let's not meet again. The first house I moved into out of high school while going to college was a very old small house in a town that dated back to the Civil War. I lived there with 3 other guys since rent was really high, but we made it work. The house itself was built on a hill and had a small driveway in front with a U-shaped driveway in the back. It had a full basement and was owned by someone with multiple rental properties in that area. They told us that we had full access to upstairs, but they used downstairs for storage and to never go down there because it was full of their stuff. We never really questioned it because the rent for this particular location, especially for our area, was low. We were still technically on campus, but our house was surrounded by other college students, so we could have parties whenever we wanted to. Everything was great until we started having unwanted visitors. At first, things were pretty easy to ignore, or easy to write off. A roommate home by themselves would walk into a room, and the lights would be on when they were home alone and hadn't flipped any of the switches. Or someone would hear a faucet turn on and off in a room with no one inside it. We tried to do what little research we could at the time, and found out that water pressure can cause faucets to do some crazy things on their own, and also that power surges can do similar things with flickering lights. Unfortunately though, things kept getting stranger and stranger. At one point, one of my roommates who was home alone got out of the shower and looked into the mirror to start shaving. He noticed someone else stepped out of the shower behind him and left the room. He searched the entire house but couldn't find anyone else inside. Later on, a different roommate had several items go missing out of his room, including his keys and pocket knife. He later found them in our microwave. Again, no one was home at the time. Me personally, I got home on a day when nobody else was at the house for a couple of hours in between classes. There was a folding chair on the front porch next to the door, and I had an armload of books. I set the books down on the chair, unlocked and pushed open the front door. I bent down to pick up my books, and the door was slammed in my face. I thought maybe the wind had caught the door and then went to open it, but discovered that the door had locked itself again, both the handle and the deadbolt. Last of all, 3 of us were sitting together on a couch watching TV when we heard a loud, heavy thud, as though something had been dragged off into a back bedroom. All 3 of us later confirmed that we distinctly heard both footsteps walking through the house, as well as the sound of something heavy being dragged. Last of all, The back door opened and slammed shut, even though we were all inside the living room, and there was supposedly no one else in the house. Around a week later, we started to smell gas inside, and we called the authorities in the middle of the night. They searched the house, with us waiting on the front lawn. They finally came outside and told us they couldn't find any kind of gas leak, and then asked us to open up the basement. We had never been down there because of our landlord's request, but since the fire department was asking, we opened the garage door. Right in front of us was a Honda Shadow motorcycle with a large pool of gasoline underneath it, where the tank had apparently leaked underneath it and the rest of the house. The firefighters saw this and decided to leave, while we were left to look around the rest of the basement. Most of what we found was shelves and shelves of canned food, but in the very middle of the floor, which was underneath everyone's bedrooms, we found an embalming table, some sort of second device. I'm still not sure what the second device was. It was cylindrical, with a small viewport in the front door, and it seemed to have some places on the back for hoses or pipes to connect to it. Although nothing was attached when we found it, it was around the size of 2-liter bottle sodas. Soon after, we would come to find out that our landowner worked night shifts at a local hospital. Whatever it was or whatever was going on inside that house, we decided that enough was enough, and we all decided to move out as soon as our lease was up. Unfortunately, I was the last one there, and I promise that last 7 days I spent there alone were the longest days I spent anywhere since. I'm a self-described cynic, and I don't believe anything when it comes to the supernatural. But I can also admit when I have absolutely no explanation for a set of events. I'm sure the Reddit scientists will be able to explain everything that happened to me now that many years have passed. But I don't really need their explanations anymore. I just accept that being in old houses alone is not a good idea, and still to this day I do my best to avoid them altogether.
Maybe 2.5 years back, I met a chick at a bar. She had been stood up and I'd just knocked off for the day. I didn't go there with any idea to score. I just wanted a couple of pints to help me unwind. I'd been there for around 45 minutes when the bartender slipped me a note. It was from a girl sitting at the end of the bar. She asked me to grab a table with her so we could talk. My curiosity was piqued, so I looked to my right and locked eyes with possibly the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. I thought that maybe I'd been given the note accidentally. No way a girl that hot was interested in me. To make sure, I pointed at the note and then mouthed, "Was this for me?" Then pointed to myself. To my amazement, she nodded yes. That's where our evening began. I grabbed a quiet table in the corner and she joined me. We introduced ourselves before getting to the small talk. Her name was Amber and she was 25. Close up, she was even more beautiful than I thought. I asked her why she'd written the note. I was genuinely curious. While I'm not a walking mess, I was nowhere near her level. The possibility I was being tricked came to mind, so I asked if I was being pranked, but she said no. It wouldn't be the first time. My friends seemed to think it was funny that any girl would like me. They put notes on my windshield at least twice pretending to be from a secret admirer. I never fell for it though. I'm far smarter than they think I am. This, however, looked to be a real encounter. If it was, I was going to play it all the way through. The getting to know each other continued another half hour until she asked if I wanted to take her home. I jumped on it, and we walked a few blocks to my apartment. We had a few more drinks and started messing around. I don't kiss and tell, so I'll just say we enjoyed one another's presence for the rest of the night. When I awakened the next morning, she was already gone. I wrote it off as just an amazing dream and hit the head. When I came out, a pair of beer bottles caught my eye. I walked over to get a closer look. One had lipstick residue on the mouth. I still wasn't positive. I walked over to the bed and sniffed the pillow opposite to mine. The wonderful smell threw me back to the previous evening. There was no doubt. It had really happened. I was over the moon for a long time. I hoped to see her again. I went as far as asking some employees if they knew how to find her, but none did. As time went by, however, I wrote it off as just a one-night stand. I began dating a new girl, a wonderful fun chick to be around, but Amber stayed in the forefront of my mind. This new relationship never really went anywhere, and we ended things a few months in. Being newly single, I had hoped to track Amber down and maybe pick back up where we left off. I returned to the bar and asked around again. I got the same answer. I didn't have the money to hire a detective. Without a last name, I couldn't even do a search on the internet. Providence would arrive in the form of Craigslist. I was browsing the site and came across the missed connection section. It looked to be just as good as any other avenue, so I made a short description of our night together and how I'd like to meet up again. I posted it and went on with my life. All was quiet until day 8. A message came from someone claiming to be Amber. I asked a few questions. They knew all of the answers and even added things no one else could have known. I was overjoyed to be talking to her again and asked if we could meet for drinks. She agreed and suggested the place where we first met. It sounded perfect, almost romantic. I started to believe this may go somewhere. My months-long search was over. For the rest of the week, my stomach was in knots. I was counting the hours. Saturday eventually arrived and I made my way to meet her. She was visible from outside and more beautiful than I remembered. I joined her at the table, and the night went much as it had on our first meeting, all but one thing. Throughout the evening, she checked her phone many times. I assumed that she was just nervous and tried to ignore it. It was a few hours before she then suggested we go back to her place. I'd been looking forward to this for months. On our way out, I visited the bathroom. As I walked away, I noticed that she was fiddling with her phone again. However, now she was making a call. I didn't care. Besides, maybe she was just calling her roommate. She was basically a stranger to me. For all I knew, she had kids. Once again, I didn't care. I mean, she'd hung up by the time I returned anyway, and we made our way to her car. I stumbled my way down the street until she pointed to this plain four-door sedan, and I then shuffled up to the passenger door. She unlocked it, and I fell into the seat. We closed our doors, but instead of starting the car, she just sat there looking at me and smiled at me. Oh, maybe she wants to make out. The idea perked me up. When I leaned over to kiss her, a strange male voice told me to stop. What? I was so drunk that I had a difficult time assessing the situation. I turned my head to the back seat and saw a large masked man pointing a gun at me. Don't make me shoot you, cowboy. Instantly, I sobered up. I could tell that he meant every word. I looked over to Amber. Our eyes met, and I knew I'd been tricked. They were cold, lacking any empathy. I was devastated. I lost my desire to live at that very moment. Moving much faster than I should have, I yanked my wallet from my pocket and threw it into the back seat. I think my nonchalance caught the man off guard. He said nothing, even as I stepped from the car and slammed the door. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood mute, staring at the pavement. It remained quiet for around 30 seconds until I heard the car start and then speed away. It wasn't long before I had a massive adrenaline dump. The seriousness of what had occurred mere minutes prior hit me like a truck. I hunched over and began vomiting. Massive amounts of booze and nachos poured from my guts. I eventually ran dry and returned to my feet. I wiped my mouth and made my way home. I wanted nothing but to sleep, and I didn't even bother to undress before falling into bed. Most of the day was gone when I woke up. I chugged a bottle of Gatorade, which was my hangover cure. The events of the previous night became clearer by the second. I felt so stupid, all the time that I'd wasted looking for her. Then I got angry, and my desire for revenge kicked in. A quick shower and a 2-mile walk later, I found myself filing a report. In Chicago, stick-ups generally don't get much attention. When the detective handed me some mugshots, I got the idea that I'd stumbled onto something a tad more serious. I was shocked to see the faces of Amber and her accomplice staring back at me. I pointed them out, and the detective gave me the lowdown. Only at that moment did I realize just how lucky I'd been. According to him, I had fallen prey to a scam. Amber's real name was Shannon, and she'd been a career con artist. The pair had been targeting single men for the last 6 months or more. I was thought to be their 5th victim, and the previous 3 had been killed. I felt a shudder through my body. The detective was unsure why I'd been allowed to live. That made 2 of us. Perhaps our history made me too much of a risk. Maybe she'd been pressured into doing it by her partner. I'll probably never know. It was hoped that I had some new information to give him, but I ended up being no help. We spoke a little longer before he sent me home. Now I was even more confused. I was happy to be alive, but on the other hand, however, I wonder why I'd been spared. I have one particularly funny theory, that they didn't consider $23 on a maxed out card worth killing over. But the truth is, it's not really a joking matter. Things wouldn't get any clearer when Amber's accomplice was arrested. He'd been brought in on unrelated charges, only to lawyer up the second he was asked any questions. He'll stay mum more than likely, even when presented with the possibility of execution. The detective on my case thinks Amber probably won't be caught for a long time, and even if she is, she'll go the way of silence too. If and when she's caught, I hope I can get a few minutes alone with her. Not because I wish her any harm. I've come to terms with her role in the crime. Instead, I'd like to ask why I was spared when others weren't. I'd like to think it's because we made some type of connection on an emotional level. Then again, that's probably just my romantic side thinking out loud. In truth, it probably just wasn't my time.
I'm a 36-year-old female in Sweden. I've worked in mental health care for the last 18 years, mainly with people with psychotic illnesses like schizophrenia. I was working at a group home for 9 years, and we're very close with my coworkers there, especially 2 females. The last few years I worked there, another female started working there. We'll just call her M, and the 4 of us grew very close. She was very timid, shy, friendly, and we all got along well. She was often on long-term sick leave due to her own mental health issues, so we didn't meet much at work. However, she always showed up at our after-work dinners, allowing us to stay in touch even when she wasn't well enough to work full-time. She told us that she had a history of schizophrenia, just like the patients we were treating, but that she was medicated and hadn't had any psychotic episodes for years. Since I have an education in psychiatry and extensive experience with schizophrenia, I had no judgment toward people suffering from the illness, and didn't bother me to be friends with someone who had such a diagnosis, and even after what I will tell you, I still feel the same way. In the summer of 2023, I had moved on to work at a new place, still within mental health, but this time in forensic psychiatry. Like a halfway house for mentally ill individuals who had committed serious crimes, though. And the 4 of us stayed in touch and still met for dinner parties. M told us that she had been evicted from her apartment because of an incident where she accidentally entered her neighbor's apartment in the middle of the night. She explained that in the huge apartment complex, all the doors looked exactly the same, and she had simply walked into the wrong door by accident. She claimed the neighbors had created a scene and reported her to the police out of pure drama. I felt that while evictions seemed out of proportion for that incident, perhaps the landlord took action because he had judged her based on her medical history, and I felt bad for her. I questioned her if something else had happened, but she insisted that that was the full story. In Sweden, it's very difficult to get a contract for an apartment after being evicted. You pretty much get blacklisted. M asked me if she could move in with me, and she said she was literally homeless, and I said, of course you can. I've always gotten myself into uncomfortable situations by saying yes instead of thinking about myself, and I had no idea how severe the situation would get when I said yes to M. I live in a small apartment with 1 bedroom, a living room that only fits a couch and a TV, a small kitchen, and a small bathroom. I also had 2 cats. We decided M would live in the living room, and I offered to throw out my couch so she could have the bed there, but she said she was fine with sleeping on the couch. I insisted on giving her a bed, but she declined. There's a door between the living room and bedroom, but only an open arc between the living room and hallway, so she wouldn't have total privacy. I hung up a thick velvet curtain to give her a sense of a door and more privacy. There's another door from my bedroom to the kitchen, so I kept the kitchen door open at night for my cats to go in and out. She wasn't working at this time because she was on one of her long-term sick leaves while I was working shifts. Sometimes I had to get up at 6 a.m. and sometimes I didn't get home until 11 p.m. I have severe insomnia, need to combine sleep medications, and even then I wake up easily. I told her I would appreciate if she could try to stay quiet on nights when I had to get up early, but that it was fine to be loud when I was off of work or doing evening shifts. She was a heavy smoker and coffee drinker, so I bought her a coffee machine to make her stay more comfortable. The coffee machine and sink are placed right outside my bedroom door in the small kitchen. The first night together, I had to get up at 6 a.m. for my shift. As usual, I had a hard time falling asleep. Em had been up several times that night to smoke, waking me up each time. At 5 a.m., she started making coffee and the noise woke me up completely. I asked her nicely why she was waking up so early, wondering if she had any plans. She said she couldn't sleep. I explained that I really needed that last hour of sleep because of work and asked if she could wait until 6 a.m. to make coffee. I also mentioned that my epilepsy gets worse when I don't get enough sleep, and I was at risk of having seizures at work if I didn't sleep enough. She said that she wanted coffee with her cigarettes, but would try to wait next time I had to work. Despite this, she continued to wake me up early in the morning and throughout the nights, insisting that she needed coffee with her cigarettes. I suggested making coffee the night before or drinking iced coffee or Coke instead, but she refused. She demanded silence at 10 p.m. because that's when she wanted to sleep, and I respected that. She also had moments of binge eating, emptying my fridge and pantry. Once, she ate an entire loaf of bread within 30 minutes of me leaving the apartment, promising to replace it once she got money. I had also told her to feel at home, so I couldn't really get mad, but it started to annoy me because of the cost and inconvenience. Em had long black hair that was everywhere, on the sink, floor, and bathtub. I'm not a clean freak, but it was unpleasant, and she also left fingernails and toenails on the bathroom floor and drops of urine on the toilet seat. I saw a silverfish on the bathroom floor which feeds on hair and nails, likely enjoying its dessert. I initially tried to imply the need to clean by putting a broom and shovel in the bathroom, but it didn't work. And I eventually asked her nicely if she could clean the bathroom floor more often, using we instead of you to avoid making her feel attacked. She promised to think about it, but nothing changed. I started dating a guy and was head over heels for him. He was also in a roommate situation, so we had a tough time getting alone time. I asked him if we could have one night to ourselves occasionally, but she could have the apartment to herself as well. She claimed that she had nowhere to go, no friends or family. I wasn't asking for 24 hours, just a few hours for quality time, and she eventually accepted after some persuasion and stayed with a friend one night while I stayed away the next week to give her more alone time. One morning, I found my cat's water bowl completely dried out. There was no spill, and it looked wiped out with a towel or paper. I had filled it the night before. She claims that the cats must have tipped it over, but there was no evidence of a spill, and my overly social cats began to withdraw from her, spending most of their time in my bedroom, which was unusual. I had an old saucepan from the 60s that meant a lot to me because it was my grandmother's and held nostalgic value. She burnt it and made no attempt to clean it, just left it on the stove and went out for a smoke. I found it ruined and cried, and she didn't even apologize. She also broke dishes several times without replacing them or apologizing, and this added to my frustration. After 2 months, she kept waking me up at night, binge eating my food, never cleaning, never leaving the house, scaring my cats and ruining my things. I realized that she had stolen my prescribed sleeping pills. I had 20 in my nightstand when I left for work, and they were gone when I returned. She denied it, but no one else could have taken them. The summer heat was strong, and I felt locked up in my tiny bedroom with my 2 cats. I never got any time to myself or alone time with the guy that I was dating. My apartment was messy, and she was stealing from me. Out of nowhere, my old elementary school classmate texted me on Facebook and asked how I knew Em. He had seen my Facebook post about us being roommates. I told him that we were old co-workers and that she needed a place to stay because she got evicted, and he said, "I know. Do you know why she was evicted?" "Yeah, she accidentally went into her neighbor's apartment," I replied. He said, "That's not the full story. She broke in and snuck up to their sleeping baby with a knife in her hand. The father woke up and wrestled her down, saving the baby." I felt sick to my stomach. Could this be true? It would certainly explain why she was evicted, but it sounded so horrible. She seemed so timid, and my friend had the full police report. Apparently, the couple that she broke into was his ex-girlfriend's family. It seemed M had a psychosis during the break-in, but those parts weren't public. It was clear that she had been lying about what happened and how long she had been mentally stable. I started getting paranoid and wanted her to move out. We had a contract with a 30-day notice period. I knew asking her harshly would mean 30 days of chaos, so I wanted to handle it nicely. I started looking for cheap hostels for her to suggest so that she wouldn't be on the streets. I sat down with her and explained that I missed my alone time and the apartment was too small for 2 people. I said it wasn't personal and that I wouldn't want to live with anyone right now. I expressed regret and hoped that we would remain friends. She looked crushed and said it wasn't possible. I showed her the hostel I found and explained that I needed her to move out because I felt suffocated. The summer heat made it tough to keep the door to the bedroom closed and I needed my sleep. She said that she would try to move out, but not until the 30 days had passed, and I agreed. The first night after our talk, she got up and made coffee at 2:30 a.m. I nearly had a mental breakdown. I was going to get up at 6 and couldn't go back to sleep. I asked her in the morning for probably the 10th time to wait until I got up to make coffee, but she didn't even answer. She just sat on the sofa and stared out the window. I was freaked out, but left for work. She kept being weird, making a mess, waking me up, eating my food, and all I could think about was the incident with her and the baby and the knife. Eventually, I got so angry about being woken up by the coffee maker that I unplugged it and stored it in my attic, which she had no access to. It may be childish, but I was going crazy and just wanted her to stop. The next night, I woke up at 4 a.m. to her making coffee in a saucepan. I tried talking to her again, but she just stared and didn't reply. In my frustration, I stored the saucepan in the attic too. The third night, the guy I was dating was sleeping over because I was getting really paranoid about her weird behavior. I woke up to him poking me, whispering, "Look." In the doorway, M was just standing silently, staring at us. It was like a scene from a horror movie with her long black hair over her face. I didn't say anything at first, wondering if she was doing something by the door, but realized that she was still just standing still, staring. It reminded me of the ending of Paranormal Activity where Katie just stares at Micah. I sat up and said, "What are you doing?" But before I could finish, she slammed the door shut and I heard the sound of something metal falling and her running into the living room. I yelled, "You need to leave!" and just started crying hysterically because this was turning into a literal nightmare. Of course, I didn't go back to sleep and was really happy to have company that night. I kept asking myself if she had done this before, staring at me in my sleep. The next day I opened the door that she had slammed shut and saw a kitchen knife on the floor. And that was the metal sound that I had heard. I took all my knives and locked them in the attic. I asked a friend to come over when I told M that she had to move out immediately. During the conversation, I tried to stay calm, knowing that she had a mental illness and meant no harm despite my frustration. She didn't answer me, just stared out the window. She left the apartment and sent me a text saying that I was disrespectful for bringing a friend over to her place. That night, I thought that it would be quiet without the coffee maker or saucepans. But at 3 a.m., I woke up to her burning dry coffee powder in a frying pan, and I was terrified. Her face was dead, her eyes black, and I suspected that in that moment, she was in a psychosis. I stopped the fire that was starting and she ran off to the living room in silence. She had an appointment with her psychiatrist the next day, and while she was away, I packed all her things and sent her a text telling her that she needed to pick them up and return my keys. I offered to give her money for a hostel for the remaining 26 days, and she didn't reply. The guy I was seeing came to keep me company in case she fought about it, and she didn't. She left the keys without looking at us and left. Our coworkers told me that she moved in with a guy that she was dating and stayed there for a few weeks until she somehow got an apartment on her own. She started working again, and I was always happy to hear this, and she seemed to be doing well. Then, in January, one of our old coworkers told me that M had called her saying everything must burn, she had a baby to save, and some other very delusional stuff. She had called 112, the Swedish emergency number, but they hadn't taken it seriously. Em then proceeded to burn her entire apartment down because the voices in her head told her that she had to burn everything to save her friends and family. Her neighbors tried to rescue her, but she fought them off and ran back in, pouring liquor on the fire to make it burn more. She was arrested and sentenced last week for aggravated arson, and she will serve her time in a mental institution/prison for a long time, possibly forever. Ironically, she will probably be in the facility where I used to work and where she used to work herself. My old coworker was a witness at the trial. Apparently, Em had stopped taking her medication, the Abilify, because she felt that it made her numb and thought that she was stable enough to function without it. Apparently not. She had also stopped taking her medication the last few weeks that she stayed at my house, which explains her behavior. It's disturbing to think about what could have happened to me and my cats if she had stayed, or if I had been a heavy sleeper. I also think about what could have happened to that baby that she snuck up on before she was evicted. I know it's crazy that I just didn't throw her out sooner. It was complicated. The reason I haven't been able to talk about it with my friends is that they sympathize with her and minimize my experience. They think I'm making a bigger deal out of it than it was, and I sort of understand since they never saw the darkness in her eyes that I saw in those last couple days.
This incident happened back in 2014 when I was last committed to a psych ward for a suicide attempt. A little background: I am female and was 19 at the time. I was coming off of 3 years of bipolar medication while at a peak of substance abuse facilitated by my first year in college, going crazy with new adult freedom. One night I had a big mental episode and was committed for the first time in the adult ward. Previously, I had only been admitted in the minors ward during my adolescence for similar episodes. Within this unit, you had to share a room with the same sex but weren't given any proper introductions. The facility as a whole wasn't managed effectively, nor did any of the nurses or doctors seem to care other than to prescribe and get you out. I was lead to the room I was staying in, and the nurse just said to the other lady in the room, "This is your new roommate," and left. The woman appeared to be in her late 40s or early 50s, Hispanic and just a little taller than me. She would not keep her gaze off of the floor in front of her and didn't say a word or move when I said hi. I noticed she had a tattoo of a cartoon version of the classic Red Devil, but as a baby, I figured I'd just leave her alone and stick to my area of the room. The first night went as they normally do in a psych ward. My roommate declined to share anything yet again, only staring at the floor, barely moving an inch. While everyone was lining up to be given their medication before bed, the ward across began to start banging on the glass of the door and screaming. One guy was smiling while banging his bald head against the glass window part, while the guys behind him were screaming and jumping around. It seemed as if they were almost going to break through, but orderlies came and took them away with their screams still lingering through the halls. Being in psych wards before, I wasn't surprised by out-of-the-ordinary behavior like yelling or fights starting, but this was completely different to me. I was with disturbed adults now, people who had years of illness deteriorating their mind, not little angry kids anymore. I actually felt scared for the first time because of the high level of unpredictability with these people. I knew I wasn't all there in the head, but even these people had me anxious and made it difficult to try to get any rest that night. You know that feeling of being awake but you haven't opened your eyes yet? The moment where you are barely waking up and everything is fuzzy. This is the state of conscious I was in later that night. I felt as if something was waking me up, yet still tired, so I wasn't opening my eyes. The more I came to reality, I felt pressure on my forehead, and I could sense sweat dripping on my face. I opened my eyes to find the roommate standing over my bed, staring me in the eye with one hand on my forehead and the other in a balled-up fist on her chest, while she speaks in what I assume is tongues. I look into her eyes and they are blank and empty of any emotion. She keeps speaking faster and getting louder. I am paralyzed at this moment, not sure what to do or what she would even do if I were to yell or move. It was only us in the room, and the nurse's station is all the way at the end of the hall. She started wiping the sweat off my forehead while still speaking fast and erratic, and I wasn't sure what she was doing or planned on doing next. She then put both hands on my forehead, and at this point was screaming while shaking me, but not long before a nurse came in and took her off me. The nurse seemed more irritated that she had to get up and do her job, rather than concerning of how I was doing or feeling. She escorted the woman out and said to don't worry and just go back to sleep. I don't know how, but I managed to fall back asleep. I assume she got transferred to the more severe ward because I did not see her again the next day. and luckily, I was able to leave later that day. This incident has since been a reminder for me to never go back and to manage my mental well-being, because while I have issues, I could be in a far worse state of mind. I still wake up some nights with lingering anxiety and have to calm myself down to go back to sleep. When I was accepted into a college that was far from my hometown, I didn't really know anyone else who lived there. The college I went to didn't have dorms, but they did have apartments that they suggested students live in due to the proximity to the college. I was pretty broke at that point, plus I wanted to meet some new people right away, so I chose my apartment largely due to a roommate matching service they had. Basically, you fill out a questionnaire about your demographics and hobbies, and the service would match you with roommates that were compatible with you. Mind you, I chose this particular apartment despite the 1-star reviews I saw across the board online. I mean, they were under new management, and it was only a year lease. It couldn't be that bad. I was matched with another guy in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. I was so excited to move in and meet him. I moved in a few days after the lease started, probably about 3 weeks before school started, and already began regretting my decision. The apartment was and smelled like mold and old cigarettes. In fact, there was a used ashtray on the coffee table when I first got there. My new roommate didn't show up for about a week. When he did finally show up, I found out he was about 35 and didn't even go to my school. He was pretty scruffy and smelled like old cigarettes and BO. Eventually, I found out that he used to be homeless and took out student loans to afford the application fee and first few months' rent, but he never enrolled in classes. After the first few months, he stopped paying rent, and it took about 6 months for the property to finally evict him. While he lived in my apartment, he never changed his clothes. He always wore the same beat-up-looking camo pants and stained, dirty wife beater. I even offered him some clothes I was getting rid of that would have fit him fine. He was content though, so whatever. He would also have a lot of his old roommates from when he lived at homeless shelters over. It wouldn't be uncommon for me to come home to a random person doing laundry, even when my roommate wasn't home. When I would have a guy over to hang out in my room, he would watch us walk from the front door to my room through a crack in his door, just wide enough for me to see the creepiest look on his face. Literally every time. Needless to say, he gave me the creeps. A few months after school started, and after I was noticing his creepy behavior more and more, I was in my room asleep with a guy I was talking to at the time when I hear a knock on my bedroom door. I look to the clock and it's about 3 in the morning. I get up to go see what whoever it was wanted, and open my door to a random, dirty and old naked guy. He says he's a friend of my roommate and thought my roommate was in my room with me. I flipped out. Obviously, my roommate isn't in my room with me. In order to get into my apartment, my roommate would have to let him in. And the apartment isn't very big, so it wasn't like my roommate could have gone somewhere else that his friend wouldn't know where he was. He was either in the living room or in his room. I throw this dude out and let myself into my roommate's room. This is the first time I've been in there, mainly because I have no reason to associate with him, and he's sitting in the corner doing absolutely nothing with his lights off, almost as if he was waiting for me to come in there. I ask him about everything that just happened, and he tries to play dumb like he didn't even know the guy. Someone had to let him in, and it wasn't me. I drop it, begrudgingly, because the eviction notices are piling up on his door. I figure it's just a matter of time until he's gone. In the meantime, I see the naked dude randomly in the apartment doing laundry a handful of times when I would get home from class. Finally, my roommate is evicted, and I think I'm done with that, and maybe we'll get another roommate that is actually my age or cool. A few weeks go by that are more or less quiet. Then one day I hear a knock at the front door during the day. When I answer it, I see the random naked dude standing there, thankfully clothed this time, with a trash bag full of what looked like disgusting laundry. He tells me that my roommate said it was cool if he came to use the washer, and starts to walk forward like he owns the place. I step in front of him and tell him that his friend doesn't live there anymore, and no, he can't use my washing machine. I close the door, lock it, and go back to my room. About 20 minutes later, I keep hearing a random noise from my balcony. I lived on the 3rd floor, so I figured it was just a squirrel or a bird out there scratching around. I keep hearing the noise, so I decide to investigate, and I see the homeless guy trying his best to climb up to my balcony. I told him I was calling the cops, but obviously by the time they get there, he's gone. That same day, I went to the property manager and asked what kind of roommate matching service works like that and demanded to get out of my lease. After some heated discussion, I persuaded her that it was probably in her best interest to just let me leave. I found a nice 1-bedroom and never looked back.